Narrator, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel now, get comfortable and relax. The headlights barely cut through the torrential downpour as I squinted at the empty road ahead. I should have known better than to take this shortcut, but I was already running late for my sister's engagement party now. As the wind howled and rain lashed against my windshield, I realized this might have been the worst decision I'd made all year. That's when I heard a sputtering cough from the engine, followed by an ominous rattle. No, I muttered. Gripping the steering wheel tighter, the car lurched, losing speed rapidly. I managed to guide it to the shoulder before it shuddered to a complete stop. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and trying to calm my racing heart. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I fished my phone out of my purse, praying for at least one bar of signal. Nothing, of course. With a deep breath, I popped the hood and stepped out into the deluge. The rain soaked through my clothes instantly, plastering my hair to my face. I propped open the hood and peered inside the meager light from my phone, revealing absolutely nothing. I understood a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms, hoping they'd stop to my relief. The vehicle, a pickup truck, slowed and pulled up behind me. A man stepped out, raincoat pulled tight around him. He approached with a friendly wave car trouble he called over the storm. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. It just died on me. "I don't know what's wrong." He nodded, moving closer to inspect the engine mind. "If I take a look," I stepped back, grateful for the help. "Please be my guest." As he leaned in the light from my phone, illuminated his face. He was older than I'd initially thought, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and deep-set eyes. There was something about those eyes that made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to the stress of the situation. "Looks like your alternator might be shot," he said after a few moments. "Not something we can fix out here." I'm afraid I felt my heart sink. "Great," I muttered. "Just great." He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I can give you a ride to the nearest town if you'd like. There's a mechanic there who might be able to help." I hesitated. Every instinct told me getting into a car with a stranger was a bad idea, especially on a night like this. But what choice did I have that would be great? "Thank you," I said. Forcing a smile, he grinned back, and something in that smile made my skin crawl, happy to help grab whatever you need and hop in. "I'm Jake, by the way, Sarah," I replied quickly. Gathering my purse and a small overnight bag from the back seat, I climbed into his truck. The warmth of a stark contrast to the chill outside as we pulled away. I cast one last glance at my car, a lonely silhouette in the rain. "So, Sarah," Jake said as we drove, "what brings you out to these parts on such a nasty night?" I was heading to my sister's engagement party. I explained, thought I'd take a shortcut. Guess that backfired. He chuckled, a low growly sound. "Shortcuts have a way of doing that. Sometimes you from around here?" I shook my head. "No, just visiting you, born and raised," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Know these roads like the back of my hand." We lapsed into silence for a few minutes. The rhythmic swish of the wipers is the only sound I found myself studying Jake out of the corner of my eye. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. Every so often he'd glance my way, that unsettling smile playing on his lips. "So tell me about yourself, Sarah," he said, suddenly breaking the silence. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a teacher," I replied. Keeping my answer vague, something told me to be cautious with personal information. A teacher? That's admirable work. What, grade 3rd? I lied, I actually taught high school, but I didn't want to say that. Jake nodded his eyes. "Never leaving the road. You married, got kids?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said, my unease. "Growing, not yet." He clicked his tongue. "Pretty girl like you. That's ashamed." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, searching for a way to change the subject. "How much further to town?" "Oh, we've got a ways to go yet." He said, that smile returning, "Plenty of time to chat." My heart rate picked up. I didn't remember the town being this far when I'd passed through earlier. I tried to focus on the road looking for familiar landmarks, but the rain made it nearly impossible to see anything beyond the immediate range of the headlights, and Jake continued, his tone conversational. It's not safe for a woman to be out alone on a night like this. All sorts of unsavory characters about. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I'm usually more careful. I managed to say. He glanced at me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. Oh, I'm sure you are. But sometimes careful just isn't enough. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. I subtly checked the door handle, relieved to find it unlocked. At least I had an escape route if I needed it. You said there was a mechanic in town, I asked, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Jake nodded. Old Bill, known him for years. He'll take good care of you. Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. I found myself wondering if there really was a mechanic named Bill, or if Jake was just leading me on. We turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved track. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the darkness. This doesn't look like the way to town, I said, unable to keep the fear out of my voice. Jake chuckled. Just a little detour. Roads flooded up ahead. I didn't believe him for a second. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I gripped my purse tighter, feeling for my keys. They weren't much, but they were better than nothing if I needed to defend myself. Jake said, his voice taking on a darker tone. I've been driving these roads for decades, picked up all sorts of interesting folks, but none quite as interesting as you, Sarah. I didn't respond, my mind racing with possible escape plans. Could I jump out while the truck was moving? We weren't going that fast, but in this rain I'd likely hurt myself. And then what I had no idea where we were or which way to run, Jake continued, seemingly obvious to my distress. I bet you're wondering where we're really going, aren't you? Well, don't you worry. We're almost there, as if on key. A dilapidated house came into view. Jake pulled up in front to killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Here we are, he said, turning to face me. Home. Sweet home. I stared at the house in horror. Paint peeled from the weathered siding and several windows were boarded up. This clear really wasn't the town, and there was no mechanic in sight. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, my voice shaking. I really need to get to town. Jake's smile widened, revealing yellow teeth. Oh, I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all. Sarah, I think you know exactly what's going on here. My hand closed around my keys, holding them between my fingers like a weapon. Please, I said, just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this. I swear. He laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that made me flinch. Now, why would I do that? We're just getting started. In that moment, I knew I had to act. As Jake reached for me, I swung my fist. Keys protruding between my fingers, they connected with his face, drawing blood. He howled in pain and anger, giving me the opening I needed. I fumbled for the door hand, threw it open, and launched myself out into the rain. I hit the ground hard, mud splattering my clothes, but adrenaline propelled me forward. I could hear Jake cursing behind me, the sound of the truck door slamming. I ran blindly into the woods branches, whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Jake's shouts echoed behind me, spurring me on despite the burning in my lungs. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and contort. Minutes feeling like hours. Eventually I couldn't hear Jake anymore, but I didn't dare stop. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and through gaps in the canopy I could see the first hints of dawn lightening the sky just when I thought I couldn't go on. I burst out of the tree line and onto a paved road. In the distance I could see buildings, the town I'd been trying to reach all along, as I staggered towards civilization. A car approached. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't Jake. To my immense relief, a kindly-looking elderly couple pulled over, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked as I collapsed into their back seat. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. "No," I managed to say between sobs, "but I will be." Can you take me to the police station? As we drove into town, I would watch the sunrise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I was safe, but I knew the memory of that night would haunt me for a long time to come. I made a silent vow to myself. No more shortcuts, no more trusting strangers. Sometimes the longest way around is the safest way home. The keycard clicked and I pushed open the door to room 237, eager to collapse onto the bed after a grueling day of meetings. Little did I know this mundane motel room held a secret that would plunge me into a night of terror. I'd never forget. I tossed my briefcase onto the worn armchair and loosened my tie, surveying the room with a sigh. It was your typical budget motel fare, outdated floral wallpaper, a lumpy-looking bed and a TV that had seen better days, but it was just for one night. I reminded myself tomorrow I'd be back home away from this godforsaken town and its endless string of client presentations. As I unpacked my overnight bag, my foot caught on something in the thin carpet. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the bed. Frowning, I knelt down to investigate. There, partially hidden by the bed skirt, was a small metal ring. Curiosity piqued. I gave it a tug. To my surprise, a second sea of the carpet came up, revealing a trapdoor underneath. My heart raced as I stared at the unexpected discovery. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. What was this doing here? Where did it lead? I hesitated. Common sense. Wearing with curiosity, the smart thing would be to call the front desk, report the find, and request a new room, but something held me back. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, or maybe I was just too tired to deal with moving rooms, whatever. The reason I found myself reaching for the handle, the trap door opened with a soft creak, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cool and damp, carrying a musty odor that made me wrinkle my nose. I fished my phone out of my pocket, switching on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, cramped space below some kind of crawl space or tunnel. It looked like it extended beyond the confines of my room. Against my better judgment, I lowered myself onto the ladder. Each rung creaked under my weight as I descended, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls, which appeared to be bare earth supported by old wooden beams. As my feet touched the ground, I had to hunch over to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. I swept the light around, taking in my surroundings. The tunnel stretched out in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The walls were lined with pipes and old electrical wiring. It looked like some kind of maintenance access, but why would it be accessible from a guest room? Curiosity overrode caution, and I decided to explore a bit further. I chose the direction that I thought led further into the motel and started walking, my footsteps muffled by the earthen floor as I moved deeper into the tunnel. The air grew cold, older and damper. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The sound echoing ominously. I was about to turn back when I heard something that made me freeze in my tracks. Voices, they were muffled and distant, but unmistakably human. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. There was an urgency to the voices, a tension that put me on edge. I crept forward, following the sound. As I got closer, I could make out words. Shipments coming in, and tomorrow night we need to be ready. What about the cops? Johnson's been sniffing around. Don't worry about Johnson, he's been taken care of. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual conversation. It sounded like something illegal was going down. I edged closer, straining to hear more. The boss wants this to go smoothly. No mistakes this time. Got it. Yeah, we'll be ready. What time? Midnight. The usual spot. I leaned in, trying to catch more details, when suddenly my foot slipped on a wet patch of ground. I stumbled, my hand shooting out to catch myself against the wall in the process. My phone clattered to the ground, the flashlight beam spinning wildly. The voices abruptly stopped. My heart leapt into my throat as I heard footsteps approaching. Panic seized me as I scrambled to retrieve my phone, fumbling in the darkness. What was that? Did you hear something? Check it out. Now I snatched up my phone and turned, ready to sprint back the way I came, but in my haste and confusion, I took a wrong turn. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could see the bobbing beam of a flashlight behind me. I ran blindly, no longer caring about stealth. My lungs burned as I gasped for air in the stuffy tunnel. I could hear shouts behind me, spurring me to run faster. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, a root or a piece of debris. I couldn't tell. I went down hard. Landing face first in the dirt, pain shot through my knee and palms, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet just as a beam of light fell on me. "Hey, stop right there!" I didn't look back. Just ran the tunnel, seemed endless, twisting and turning. I had no idea where I was or how to get back to my room. All I knew was that I had to get away just when I thought my legs would give out. I saw something ahead, a ladder similar to the one in my room, without hesitation. I lunged for it, practically flying up the rungs. I burst through the trappo, finding myself in another motel room. It was dark and empty. Thank God I slammed the trappo shut and dragged the nearest piece of furniture, a heavy dresser over it, panting heavily. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. I had stumbled upon something big, something dangerous. Those men in the tunnel were clearly involved in criminal activities, and now they knew someone had overheard them. I peered out the window, trying to get my bearings. I was on the ground floor at the back of the motel. My room was on the second floor near the front. I had no idea whose room this was or when they might return. A plan started to form in my mind. I needed to get out of here. Fast, but first I had to get back to my room and grab my things. I couldn't leave any trace of my presence cautiously. I opened the door and peered out. The parking lot was quiet, no sign of any suspicious activity. I slipped out, trying to look casual as I made my way back to the main building. My heart was in my throat as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. What if they had already found my room? What if they were waiting for me? I approached my door key card in hand, taking a deep breath. I swiped it and pushed the door open, half expecting to find angry criminals waiting for me. But the room was empty, exactly as I had left it. I let out a sigh of relief, then quickly began gathering my things. I had to get out of here before they have figured out which room I was in as I stuffed clothes into my bag. My mind raced. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them, that I had eavesdropped on a criminal conversation while trespassing in a secret tunnel? It sounded insane, even to me. No, the safest thing to do was to leave quietly and anonymously. I could think about what to do with the information. Once I was far away from here, I did one last sweep of the room, making sure I hadn't left anything behind. The trap door was still open. A dark maw on the floor. I hesitated, then closed it and dragged the armchair over it. It wasn't much, but it might slow them down if they came looking with my bag packed. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The hallway was clear. I made my way to the stairs, forcing myself to walk at a normal pace. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, as I reached the lobby, I heard voices coming from the front desk. I froze, recognizing one of them as the man from the tunnel. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I couldn't go out the front. I'd have to find another way. I backtracked, following signs to a side exit. Just as I pushed the door open, I heard a shout behind me. They'd spotted me. I ran, no longer caring about looking suspicious. I sprinted across the parking lot to my car, fumbling with the keys. The shouts were, "Get closer." Finally, I got the door open and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life just as two men burst out of the motel entrance. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching in my rear-view mirror. I could see them running towards a parked car. They were going to follow me. My hands shook as I navigated the dark streets, constantly checking the mirror. How far would they chase me? What would they do if they caught up? I drove for hours, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to lose any tail. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that I finally allowed myself to relax a little. I pulled into a rest stop, exhausted and shaken as the events of the night replayed in my mind. I realized how close I had come to real danger, all because of a hidden trapdoor and my own curiosity as I sat there, watching the sunrise and contemplating my next move. One thing was clear: I would never look at a motel room the same way again. Sometimes the secrets hidden behind closed doors are better left undiscovered. The first drop of rain hit my face like an icy warning. I looked up at the darkening sky, cursing my luck. What had started as a peaceful day hike was about to turn into a nightmare. I'd never forget I'd been walking for hours enjoying the solitude of the forest and the crisp autumn air. The trail was supposed to loop back to my car, but somewhere along the way I must have taken a wrong turn. As the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped, I realized with growing dread that I was lost. The rain started in earnest fat drops pelting through the canopy above. I pulled my lightweight jacket tighter, but it did little to keep out the chill. My boots squelched in the quickly forming mud as I pushed on, hoping to find my way back to a familiar path. Thunder rumbled in the distance and I picked up my pace. The last thing I needed was to be caught in a full-blown storm. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my heart leap: a cabin. It was small and weathered, its wooden walls gray with age, but it was shelter, and right now that was all that mattered. I jogged towards it, relief flooding through me as I reached the small porch. The door was unlocked, creaking open at my touch. "Hello," I called out, not wanting to intrude if someone was inside. No answer. I stepped in, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The cabin was sparse but cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and I could see a small kitchenette in the corner. A narrow staircase led up to what I assumed was a loft. It looked like it hadn't been used in a while. A fine layer of dust covered everything. I shrugged off my wet jacket, hanging it on a hook by the door. Outside, the storm was picking up wind, howling through the trees. I was grateful for the solid walls between me and the elements. After a bit of searching, I found some dry firewood stacked near the fireplace. It took a few tries with my damp matches, but soon I had a small fire going. Its warmth a blessed relief after the chill of the rain. As I sat by the fire trying to dry out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin was a godsend, but why was it unlocked? And why did it feel like it had been abandoned in a hurry? I pushed the thoughts aside, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. I was safe dry and could wait out the storm in the morning. I'd find my way back to civilization as night fell. The storm showed no sign of letting up. The wind had picked up, whistling through gaps in the cabin's walls. Tree branches scraped against the roof, sounding unnervingly like claws trying to get in. I tried to distract myself by exploring the cabin more thoroughly in a drawer. I found an old journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The handwriting faded. I could only make out bits and pieces. Day 3, the noises are getting louder. Something's out there. Day 7, I saw it today. God help me, I saw it. Day 12, can't sleep. It's always watching. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. If you're reading this, get out. Get out. Now I snapped the journal shut, my heart racing. It was just the ramblings of some paranoid hermit. I told myself nothing to worry about. A loud crack of thunder made me jump, and suddenly the cabin was lunged into darkness. The fire had gone out. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam barely piercing the thick darkness as I moved to relight the fire. A sound froze me in place. It came from outside. A low guttural growl that was definitely not the wind. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, closer this time, and then another sound. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the porch. My mind raced. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? Whatever it was, I didn't want to meet it. I backed away from the door, looking for something to defend myself with. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could hear heavy breathing, snuffling at the crack under the door. My own breath came in short, panicked gasps. The door handle began to turn slowly, deliberately. I raised my makeshift weapon, a fire poker I'd grabbed from beside the fireplace, ready to face whatever was coming through that door, but the door didn't open. Instead, the handle stopped moving and I heard the footsteps. Retreat relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A new sound reached my ears. Something was climbing up the side of the cabin. I could hear claws scraping against wood, moving towards the window. I backed into a corner. My eyes fixed on the window. A shadow passed by, momentarily blocking out what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. Then I saw it, a face pressed against the glass, but it wasn't human. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow in the darkness. its features twisted into something nightmarish. Our gazes locked, and I felt a primal fear. Unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, but I could still hear it moving around outside. Circling the cabin, I was trapped with only a flimsy wooden structure between me and whatever that thing was. Hours passed like this with me huddled in the corner, jumping at every sound. The creature, for lack of a better word, seemed content to wait me out occasionally, scratching at the walls or letting out a low growl to remind me of its presence. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the noises outside finally ceased. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, but there was nothing but silence. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and yanked the door open. The porch was empty. The forest beyond was quiet, peaceful, even as if the terrors of the night had been nothing but a bad dream. But the deep claw marks in the wooden railing told a different story. I didn't wait around to see if the creature would return. I grabbed my still damp jacket and set off down the trail, my legs carrying me as fast as they could go. I didn't know if I was going the right way, and at that point I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that cabin as possible. It was mid-afternoon when I finally stumbled onto a road. A passing motorist took pity on me. Giving me a ride to the nearest town, I must have looked a sight. Muddy, disheveled, with wild eyes, and an even wilder story. The local sheriff listened patiently as I recounted my experience, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He promised to send someone to check out the cabin, but his tone made it clear he didn't expect to find anything. As I sat in a diner later waiting for a friend to come pick me up, I couldn't shake the memory of those glowing eyes, that inhuman face. I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, even if no one else believed me. I glanced out the window towards the forest. Looming in the distance for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move between the trees, a pair of yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. But when I blinked, it was gone. I turned back to my coffee, my hands shaking slightly as I raised the cup to my lips. I knew one thing for certain: I would never set foot in those woods again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some creatures better left undiscovered. As I left the diner, the journal I'd found in the cabin weighed heavy in my pocket. Its warning echoed in my mind. If you're reading this, get out, get out. Now, I had gotten out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That somehow, someway, the thing from the woods would find me again. I climbed into my friend's car, casting one last glance at the forest as we pulled away. I made a silent vow to myself I would be ready next time, because deep down I knew there would be. A next time the creature had my scent now, and something told me it wasn't the type to give up easily. The trees receded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of that night in the cabin would stay with me forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the monsters we imagine in the dark, but the ones that are all too real, waiting just beyond the light of our campfires, watching and waiting for their moment to strike. I never thought I'd have to fight for my own home, but there I was, staring into the eyes of a stranger who claimed my house was his, and I knew this night would end in either triumph or terror. It had been a long day at work, the kind where everything that could go wrong did. I was looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower, a glass of wine, and mindless TV before bed. As I turned the key in my front door lock, I was already mentally picking out which comfy pajamas I'd wear. The door swung open and I stepped inside, kicking off my heels with a sigh of relief. That's when I noticed something off. There was a jacket I didn't recognize draped over the back of my couch, and was that the smell of cooking coming from my kitchen? My heart started to race. Had someone broken in? Should I call the police before I could decide? A man walked out of my kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. "Oh, hey there," he said as casually as if we were old friends. "You must be the previous tenant. Did you forget something?" I stood there, frozen in shock. Previous tenant? What was he talking about? "Excuse me?" I managed to say, my voice shakier than I'd like, "But who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" The man's friendly smile faltered for a moment. "Your house. I think there's been some misunderstanding. I just moved in today." The landlord gave me the keys this morning. I felt like I was in some bizarre dream. That's impossible. I own this house. I've lived here for 3 years. He shook his head, looking concerned. Now look, I'm sorry, but I think you've made a mistake. I have a signed lease right here. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a folder, pulling out a document. I approached cautiously, my mind reeling. This had to be some kind of scam, right? But as I glanced at the paper he held out, I saw what looked like a legitimate lease agreement dated today with this man's name. James Thompson, and my address. This isn't right, I said, my voice growing stronger with indignation. I never rented this place out. I own it. There must be some mistake. James ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. Listen, I don't know what's going on here, but I paid a deposit and first month's rent. I have a legal right to be here. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police. This is ridiculous. Wait, James said, holding up his hands. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why don't we call the landlord and sort this out? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to dial 911 right away, but another part worried about looking foolish. If this really was some big misunderstanding, fine. I said, let's call the landlord, but I'm telling you, there is no landlord. I own this house. James nodded and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and hit dial. Putting the phone on speaker after a few rings, a gruff voice answered. Yeah, Mr. Peterson, this is James Thompson, the new tenant, at 1242 Elm Street. There seems to be some confusion. The previous owner is here and says she never rented out the house. My jaw dropped. I recognized that voice. It belonged to my sleazy neighbor, Bob Peterson, who'd been trying to get me to sell my house to him for months. Must be a misunderstanding, Bob stammered. Don't worry about it, James. She probably just forgot she rented it out. You've got a legal lease, so you're in the clear. I snatched the phone from James's hand. Bob, what the hell do you think you're doing? You know damn well I didn't rent out my house. There was a pause, then a click as Bob hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then at James, who looked as confused as I felt. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I don't know what's going on here, but I can prove this is my house. I have the deed tax documents. Everything. James held up his hands. Hey, I'm just as confused as you are. I answered an add-on line. Met with Mr. Peterson this morning, signed the lease and got the keys. I've been moving in all day. I walked over to the bookshelf where I kept important documents. My mind racing, this had to be some elaborate scam by Bob. But why and how did he get keys to my house? As I reached for the folder with my house documents, I noticed something else. Several of my books were gone, replaced by ones I didn't recognize. I yanked open the drawer of the side table. My spare keys weren't there. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been in my house, methodically replacing my things with someone else's. How long had this been going on? I turned back to James, who was watching me with a mix of concern and weariness. We need to call the real police, I said. Right now. He nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm telling you, I had no idea about any of this. I'm as much a victim here as you are. I wanted to believe him, but at this point I didn't know what to think. I dialed 911 and quickly explained the situation. They said they'd send someone over right away while we waited. I paced the living room, pointing out to James all the things that were mine, all the changes I'd made to the house over the years. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed. I have to ask, he said finally. Is there any chance you might have? I don't know. Forgotten. Renting this place out. Maybe due to stress, or I shot him a glare that could have melted steel. No, absolutely not. I would never rent out my home. Especially not to a stranger, and especially not through my creep of a neighbor. James held up his hands in surrender. Okay, I'm just trying to understand. The sound of a car pulling up outside made us both turn towards the window, but it wasn't a police cruiser, it was Bob's beat-up pickup truck. Oh, hell no, I muttered. Storming towards the door, I yanked it open just as Bob was about to knock. He stumbled back. Surprise and guilt flashing across his face. Hey there. I was just coming to check on things, cut the crap. Bob, I snapped. What the hell do you think you're doing? How did you get keys to my house, and why are you pretending to be a landlord? Bob's eyes darted between me and James, who had come to stand behind me. He licked his lips nervously. Now let's not get all worked up. I'm sure we can work this out. Work what out? I demanded the fact that you've apparently been sneaking into my house and replacing my things that you forged. Rental documents that's breaking and entering fraud and God knows what else. Bob's nervous smile faded, replaced by a scowl look. You should have just sold me the damn house when I offered. I told you I'd get it one way or another. I was speechless. The sheer audacity of it all was mind-boggling. James spoke up from behind me. So you're saying the lease isn't real, that this is all some scheme to force her out of her own home? Bob shrugged. It would have worked if she hadn't come home early a few more days and all her stuff would have been gone, replaced with yours. She'd have looked crazy trying to claim it was her house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, the violation, the breach of trust. It was overwhelming. I felt tears of anger pricking at my eyes. Just then, the wail of a police siren cut through the night. Bob's face paled. You called the cops? He sputtered. Of course I called the cops. I yelled. What did you expect as the police cruiser pulled up? I saw the fight go out of Bob. His shoulders slumped and he suddenly looked very, very tired. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and shocked neighbors coming out to see what all the commotion was about. James was apologetic, horrified to learn he'd been an unwitting pawn in Bob's scheme. He handed over the keys and lease without protest as the police led Bob away in handcuffs. I stood on my porch watching my home suddenly felt different, tainted by the invasion. I knew it would take time to feel safe here again. James approached me looking sheepish. I'm so sorry about all this. I have had no idea. I nodded too, drained to be angry at him anymore. I know it's not your fault. He hesitated, then said, You know, my lease on my old place isn't up yet. If you wanted, you could stay there for a bit. Until you feel comfortable here again. I was touched by the offer. Thank you, I might take you up on that. As James left and the police finally cleared out, I walked back into my house. It was mine, unquestionably mine, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Not yet. I looked around at the mix of my things and James's, at the subtle signs of Bob's intrusion. I poured myself that glass of wine I'd been dreaming of earlier, though it felt like a lifetime ago now as I sipped it. I made a silent promise to myself I would reclaim my home, my sense of safety. It wouldn't be easy, but I was tougher than Bob had bargained for after all. Home isn't just a place, it's a feeling of security, of belonging, and I'd be damned if I'd let anyone take that away from me. Music again, the old warehouse. Loomed before me, a hulking shadow against the night sky. I'd done this job 100 times before, but something about tonight felt different. If only I'd listened to that nagging feeling in my gut, I might have avoided the terror that was about to unfold. My name's Mike, and I've been working as a night security guard for the past 5 years. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my novel. At least that's what I tell myself to justify the long, lonely nights. This particular night started like any other. I arrived at the warehouse just before midnight, thermos of coffee in hand, ready for another uneventful shift. The place was huge, a maze of storage units and forgotten inventory during the day. It bustled with activity, but at night it was my kingdom of silence. I did my first round checking doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist with each step. I'd long since gotten used to the creaks and groans of the old building settling, but tonight every sound seemed amplified. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. A faint noise barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. I paused, straining my ears. There it was again, a muffled thud, followed by what sounded like whispered voices. My heart rate picked up. In 5 years, I'd never encountered anything more dangerous than a raccoon that had somehow gotten inside. But this was different. This was human. I reached for my radio, ready to call it in, but hesitated. What if it was nothing? I'd look like an idiot if I called the cops over a figment of my imagination. No, I decided I'd check it out first. I moved quietly through the warehouse. My senses on high alert. The noise was coming from the back near the loading docks. As I got closer, the whispers became clearer. Two, maybe three voices speaking in urgent hushed tones. I pressed myself against a stack of crates, inching closer to peek around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. 3 men were huddled around the back of a van, its doors wide open. They were unloading something large, heavy-looking duffel bags. One of them was holding a gun. I pulled back, my mind racing. This was way above my pay grade. I needed to call the police, and now. But as I reached for my radio, my elbow knocked against one of the crates. The sound, though small, echoed in the quiet warehouse like a gunshot. The whispers stopped abruptly. "What was that?" One of the men hissed. "Check it out." Another commanded. I heard footsteps approaching my hiding spot. Panic surged through me. I couldn't go back the way I came. They'd see me for sure. My only option was to go deeper into the warehouse. I took off running. No longer caring about stealth behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of pursuit. I weaved through the maze of shelves and crates, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew the layout of the warehouse better than they did, but they had the advantage of numbers and guns. I needed to find a place to hide, to catch my breath and think. I spotted a stack of empty wooden pallets and dove behind them, trying to control my ragged breathing. The footsteps grew closer, flashlight beams sweeping across the floor. "He's got to be here somewhere," one of the men growled. "Find him." I closed my eyes, willing myself to become invisible. The footsteps paused near my hiding spot. I could hear the man's heavy breathing, smell the acrid scent of cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he'd spotted me, but then the footsteps moved on. Fading into the distance, I let out a shaky breath. I was safe for now, but I couldn't stay here forever. I needed to get to a phone to call for help. Slowly, carefully, I peered out from behind the pallets. The coast seemed clear. I crept out, moving as quietly as I could towards the office area. If I could make it there, I could use the landline to call the police. I was halfway there when a voice rang out. There he is. I broke into a sprint, no longer caring about stealth. I could hear them behind me gaining ground. The office door was just ahead if I could reach it. Locked myself in something, hit me hard from behind. Sending me sprawling to the ground, I hit the concrete floor with a painful thud. The wind knocked out of me. Rough hands grabbed me, hauling me to my feet. I found myself face to face with one of the men, his eyes cold and hard in the dim light. Well, he sneered. "What do we have here, a little rat who doesn't know how to mind his own business?" I struggled against his grip, but it was useless. The other 2 men appeared, one of them training his gun on me. "What should we do with him?" The one holding me, asked the man with the gun, stepped forward, his face impassive. "We can't leave any witnesses." My blood turned to ice. This was it. I was going to die here in this godforsaken warehouse, and no one would know what happened to me. But then a miracle in the distance I heard. The faint wail of police sirens. The men froze, exchanging panicked looks. How one of them started to ask. Then I remembered my radio in the scuffle. I must have hit the panic button. Help was on the way, the manhole. Holding me cursed, shoving me to the ground. We got to get out of here. They took off running towards their van, leaving me lying on the cold concrete floor. I wanted to cry with relief. Minutes later, the warehouse was swarming with police. I gave my statement, still shaking from the adrenaline. The officers praised my quick thinking with the panic button. But all I could think about was how close I'd come to disaster as dawn broke. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The police had caught 2 of the men trying to flee in their van. The third was still at large, but they assured me they'd find him. I watched as officers carried out the duffel bags, their contents confirming my worst fears: drugs, weapons, cash. It was a major bust. One of the detectives approached me, a grim smile on his face. "You did good tonight, son." He said, "You stumbled onto something big, a drug trafficking operation. We've been trying to crack for months." I nodded numbly, still trying to process everything that had happened. "We'll need you to come down to the station later to give a full statement." He continued, and well, you might want to consider finding a new job. These guys have connections. It might not be safe for you here anymore. The reality of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. My life as I knew it was over. I'd have to move, start fresh somewhere new, all because I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as I watched the sunrise over the warehouse casting long shadows across the parking lot, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The monotony of my nightly routine had been shattered, replaced by a heart pounding adventure straight out of the novels I'd been trying to write. I turned to the detective. You know, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I think I might have found my new career path. He raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah, I nodded. How does one become a private investigator? The detective chuckled, shaking his head one step at a time. Kid, one step at a time. As I was driven away from the warehouse for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement for what the future held. My boring nights as a security guard were over, but a new chapter was just beginning, and this time I'd be the author of my own story. The warehouse faded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of that night would stay with me forever. It was the night that changed everything. The night I learned that sometimes the most ordinary job can lead to the most extraordinary adventure, and I was ready for whatever came next. The moment the lights flickered and died, I knew this wasn't going to be just another stormy night. Little did I know the darkness that enveloped my house would bring with it a terror I'd never imagined possible. I'd been curled up on the couch halfway through a thriller novel like Con when the storm hit, rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the trees. Outside, it was the kind of night that made you grateful for the comfort of four walls and a roof. The power had been flickering on and off all evening, so when it finally gave out completely, I wasn't surprised. I set my book aside with a sigh and fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to navigate to the kitchen where I kept my emergency candles, as I rummaged through drawers looking for matches. A loud thump from downstairs made me freeze. My house was old, full of creaks and groans, but this was different. This sounded deliberate. I held my breath, listening intently for a moment. All I could hear was the pounding of rain on the roof, then unmistakably the sound of footsteps. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was in the house. I clutched my phone tighter, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But what if it was just my imagination? I'd feel foolish if I called 911 over a case of storm-induced paranoia. Another creak closer this time. Whoever it was, they were at the bottom of the stairs now. I needed to hide. My bedroom was just down the hall, but to get there, I'd have to cross the open space at the top of the stairs. If the intruder looked up at the wrong moment, the decision was made for me as I heard the first stair groan. Under the intruder's weight, they were coming up. I darted across the hallway, praying the storm would mask any noise I made. I slipped into my bedroom and eased the door shut, fighting the urge to slam it and give away my position. My hands shook as I tried to unlock my phone to call for help, but in my panic, I must have turned it off. The startup screen glowed mockingly at me, taking an eternity to load. The footsteps were on the landing. Now slow and deliberate, they paused, and I held my breath, certain whoever it was could hear my thundering heartbeat. A floorboard creaked right outside my door. Backed away, looking wildly around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on the heavy lamp on my bedside table. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I unplugged the lamp, gripping it tightly as I positioned myself behind the door. If they came in, I'd have one chance to surprise them. The door handle turned slowly, the latch clicking as it released. Time seemed to slow down as the door began to swing open. A shadow fell across the floor, elongated and distorted in the faint light from the window. I raised the lamp. Every muscle in my body tensed. The intruder took one step into the room. I swung the lamp with all my might. There was a sickening thud and a cry of pain. The figure stumbled, and I used that moment to shove past them, bolting for the stairs. I took the steps two at a time, nearly falling in my haste behind me. I could hear angry shouts and the thunder of pursuit. I reached the bottom of the stairs and headed for the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. Precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open it. just as I managed to turn the deadbolt. A hand grabbed my shoulder, yanking me backward. I screamed more in fury than fear and swung my elbow back hard. It connected with something solid and the grip on my shoulder loosened. I wrenched the door open and burst out into the storm rain. Immediately soaked through my clothes as I ran down the driveway, I had no plan, no destination in mind other than way my bare feet slapped against the wet pavement. Small stones biting into my soles, but I barely noticed the pain. I chanced to look back and saw a figure silhouetted in my doorway. They seemed to hesitate for a moment before starting after me. I put on an extra burst of speed, rounding the corner onto the main street. Surely one of my neighbors would be home, would help me if I could just reach them. I ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door. Help, I screamed, my voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Please, somebody help me. No response. The house remained dark and silent. I moved to the next house and the next, growing more desperate with each unanswered door. Where was everyone? The sound of running footsteps spurred me on. I couldn't tell how close my pursuer was. The storm distorted everything, making it impossible to judge distance. As I approached the end of the street, I saw a glimmer of hope. The Johnsons' house had a light on in the upstairs window. Someone was home. I sprinted towards their house, my lungs burning just a little further, just a little more. I was halfway up their driveway when something hit me from behind, sending me sprawling onto the wet grass. I rolled over to see my attacker looming over me, their features hidden in shadow. No, I yelled, kicking out wildly. My foot connected with their knee and they stumbled back with a grunt of pain. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run again, when suddenly the area was flooded with light. The Johnsons' porch light had come on. What's going on out here? A gruff voice called out. I turned to see Mr. Johnson standing on his porch, a baseball bat in hand relief washed over me. Please, I gasped. Help me, this person broke into my house. They're trying to... I broke off as I turned back to my attacker. In the light from the porch, I could finally see their face clearly. It was my neighbor, Ted Sarah. He said, looking as confused as I felt, "What are you talking about? I heard you screaming and came to check on you." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this new information, but the noises, someone was in my house. Ted shook his head. "I didn't see anyone. Your front door was wide open and I could hear you yelling from down the street." Mr. Johnson had come down from his porch, still clutching his bat as everything. All right. I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could I explain what had happened when I wasn't even sure myself anymore? I thought someone had broken in. I said, "Finally, I heard noises. It's an old neighborhood." Mr. Johnson said kindly, "These houses make all sorts of noises, especially in storms like this. Are you sure it wasn't just the wind?" I wanted to protest, to insist that what I'd heard was real, but doubt was already creeping in. Had I imagined it all? Had my fear turned creaky floorboards into an intruder? Maybe, I said uncertainly. I don't know anymore. Ted put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Come on, let's get you back home. You're soaked to the bone." As we walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The fear had been so real, the danger so immediate. How could it all have been in my head? We reached my front door, still standing open for my frantic escape. Ted insisted on checking the house just to be safe. I waited on the porch, shivering in my wet clothes as he went from room to room, all clear. He said when he returned, no sign of anyone. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "Thank you, and I'm sorry for attacking you." Ted chuckled. "No harm done, though. You've got quite an arm on you, that lamp. Packs a punch." I managed a weak smile. "I'm never going to live this down, am I?" Don't worry about it." Ted said, "We've all had moments where our imagination gets the better of us. Get some rest, things will look better in the morning." After Ted left, I locked the door securely and headed upstairs to change into dry clothes. As I passed the spot where I'd hit Ted with the lamp, something caught my eye. There on the hardwood floor was a muddy footprint, a large one, much bigger than my own foot, and it was facing towards my bedroom. Not away from it like it would have been if it was Ted's. From when he came to check on me, a chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. There had been someone in my house and they were still out there somewhere. I grabbed my phone, fully charged now, and dialed 911 as I waited for the operator to pick up. I stared at that muddy footprint, a stark reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are all too real. The storm continued to rage outside, but it no longer seemed like the biggest threat someone had been in my house tonight, and something told me they wouldn't give up so easily. Whatever their intention had been, I had a feeling this was far from over as I gave my statement to the police. I couldn't shake the image of that shadowy figure in my doorway. Who were they? What did they want? And most importantly, when would they be back? One thing was certain, I would be sleeping with the lights on for a very long time. I never should have stopped. That's what I keep telling myself, replaying that moment over and over in my mind. But when I saw him standing there in the pouring rain, thumb out looking so desperate, how could I have known that act of kindness would turn into the most terrifying night of my life? The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle against the downpour as I drove along the winding country road. It was well past midnight and I was exhausted from a long day of meetings in the city, but I was almost home. Just another hour or so of driving and I'd be in my own bed. That's when I saw him, a lone figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated briefly by my headlights. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to him like a second skin. As I got closer, I could see he was trying to hitchhike, his thumb stuck out. Hopefully I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep driving. It was late. I was alone, and picking up strangers was never a good idea. But something about the desperation in his posture made me slow down. I pulled over, rolling down the passenger side window just to crack. "You okay?" I called out over the sound of the rain. He jogged over, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours." I studied him for a moment. He looked harmless enough, maybe in his mid-30s, with a kind face and tired eyes. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Hop in," I said. "Where are you headed?" He slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from his clothes onto the upholstery, just to the next town. He said there's a motel there where I can stay for the night. I nodded and pulled back onto the road. "I'm Jake," I said, figuring I should at least know the name of the man I'd let into my car. "Mike," he replied with a grateful smile. "Thanks for stopping. I was starting to think I'd be out here all night." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I snuck glances at Mike out of the corner of my eye. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable in the darkness. So I said, trying to break the awkward silence, "What brings you out this way?" Mike turned to look at me, and for a split second I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold, but it was gone so quickly I thought I must have imagined it. "Oh, you know," he said casually, "just passing through. What about you? You live around here." I hesitated, suddenly aware of how much information I was giving to a complete stranger. Yeah, about an hour up the road." Mike nodded, his eyes still fixed on me. Must be nice living out in the country like this, peaceful quiet. Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. "Yeah, it's nice," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Look, there's a gas station coming up. Maybe we should stop and see if they can help with your car." Mike's hands shot out, gripping my arm. "No," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "Keep driving." I glanced at him, my heart starting to race. The kind, weary traveler was gone, replaced by someone else. His eyes were cold, his jaw set in a harsh line. "I think you should let me out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Now he laughed, to sound devoid of any humor, I don't think. "So, Jake, we're going to keep driving and you're going to take me exactly where I want to go." My mind raced, trying to figure out a way. Out of this situation, I could try to stop the car, but at this speed in this rain, I'd likely crash. I could try to overpower him, but I had no idea if he was armed. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Mike smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "What do I want? "Oh, Jake." I want everything. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light of the dashboard. "At first I want your wallet, then your phone, and then we're going to take a little trip to your house. I bet a guy like you has some nice things." My stomach dropped. He knew where I lived, or at least he knew it was close. I had to do something, and fast. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "My wallet's in my back pocket. Let me pull over and I'll get it for you." Mike's grip on the knife tightened. "Nice try. Keep driving. I'll get it myself." He leaned over his free hand, reaching around to my back pocket. In that moment of distraction, I made my move. I slammed on the brakes, sending us both lurching forward. Mike's head hit the dashboard with a sickening thud before he could recover. I threw the car into park and lunged for the knife we grappled in. The confined space, the knife between us like a deadly game of tug, of where I could feel the blade nicking my hand, but adrenaline dulled the pain with a final burst of strength. I wrenched the knife from his grasp and threw it into the back seat. Mike roared with rage, his hands now free to pummel me with wild, angry blows. I raised my arms to protect my face, frantically searching for the door handle. With my other hand, I found it and threw the door open, tumbling out onto the wet asphalt. My Mike was right behind me, grabbing at my legs as I tried to scramble away. The rain was still coming down in sheets, making the ground slick and treacherous. I slipped and fell, Mike's weight landing on top of me. We rolled on the ground, each fighting for dominance in the struggle. My hand closed around something hard and cold. A rock. Without thinking, I swung it with all my might. There was a sickening crack, and suddenly Mike's weight was gone. I scrambled to my feet, panting and disoriented. Mike lay on the ground, unmoving, blood mixed with rain running in pink rivulets across the asphalt. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him. Then he groaned, stirring slightly relief and fear whirred within me. He was alive, but for how long, and what would happen when he came to? I ran back to the car, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I could see Mike in my rearview mirror slowly pushing himself up to a sitting position. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, not caring about the rain or the slick roads. All I wanted was to put as much distance between myself and Mike as possible. When I finally saw the lights of the next town, I nearly wept with relief. I pulled into the police station parking lot, my car barely in park before I was out and running towards the entrance. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and questions. They sent out patrols to look for Mike, but the storm had washed away most of the evidence. They assured me they would keep looking, that they would find him. But as I sat in the station, a shock blanket around my shoulders and a cup of lukewarm coffee in my trembling hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Mike was still out there, and he knew more about me than I was comfortable with. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the rain-soaked town, I made a decision. I couldn't go home. Not yet, maybe not ever. Mike had taken more than just my sense of safety. He'd taken my ability to trust, my belief in the goodness of strangers. I called my boss, told him I needed some time off. Then I checked into a motel under a false name, paid in cash, and tried to figure out what to do next. As I lay on the lumpy motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly life can change. One moment of misplaced kindness, one split-second decision, and suddenly everything you know is turned upside down. I don't know if they'll ever catch Mike. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe picking up a hitchhiker again, but I do know one thing. The next time I see someone standing on the side of the road, thumb out, looking desperate, I'll keep driving no matter how hard it's raining. The moment I opened my hotel room door and saw a stranger rifling through my suitcase, I knew this wasn't going to be the relaxing business trip I'd planned. What I didn't know was that this encounter would spiral into a night of terror that would change my life forever. I just returned from a long day of meetings, my feet aching in my too-tight dress, shoes, my mind fuzzy from hours of PowerPoint presentations. All I wanted was a hot shower and to collapse into bed. But as I swiped my keycard and pushed open the door, I was jolted awake by the sight before me. A man, probably in his mid-30s, was standing over my open suitcase. My clothes strewn across the bed. He looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across his face, before being replaced by an unconvincing smile. "Oh, hello," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "There must be some mistake. This is my room." I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "Your room?" I managed to stammer, "No, this is my room 304. I checked in this morning." The man's smile never wavered, but I noticed his eyes darting towards the door behind me. I see the confusion. "I just checked in an hour ago. The front desk must have made a mistake. Why don't we go down together and sort this out?" Every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong here. This man was lying, that much was clear, but why? And more importantly, what was he really doing in my room? I took a step back, my hand still on the door handle. "I think I'll call the front desk from here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile faltered for a moment. "No need for that," he said quickly. "Look, I have the key right here." He held up a key card identical to mine. My heart was pounding now. How did he get a key to my room? Was he working with someone at the front desk? I needed to get out of there to get help. "Okay," I said. Forcing a smile of my own, "Let's go down together and sort this out." I stepped back into the hallway, expecting him to follow. Instead, he lunged forward, shoving me hard. I stumbled, my back hitting the opposite wall of the corridor before I could recover. He was out the door, running towards the elevators. Without thinking, I took off after him. "Stop," I yelled. "Security!" He reached the elevators and jabbed frantically at the call button. But luck was on my side. The doors remained stubbornly closed. He looked back at me, then at the stairwell door. Next to the elevators, making a split-second decision, he burst through the door and started down the stairs. I followed, my dress shoes slipping on the concrete steps. I could hear his footsteps echoing below me, getting fainter as he widened the gap between us. As I reached the ground floor, I saw him dash across the lobby towards the main entrance. The night clerk looked up, startled by the commotion. "Stop that man!" I shouted. He was in my room. The clerk, a young man barely out of his teens, looked bewildered. He made a half-hearted attempt to step in front of the intruder, but the man easily dodged around him and burst out into the night. I ran out after him, the cool night air a shock after the stuffy stairwell. I looked left and right, but the street was empty. He was gone, panting. I turned back to the hotel. The clerk was standing in the doorway, looking concerned and confused. "What happened?" he asked as I approached. "Who was that man?" I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't know. I found him in my room going through my things. He had a key." Somehow the clerk's eyes widened. "That's impossible. We never give out duplicate keys." "Well, he had one." I snapped, my fear turning to anger, and now he's gone. Probably with half my belongings. The clerk, looking increasingly distressed, ushered me inside. "Let's call the police," he said, "and I'll get the manager." The next hour was a blur of police statements and questions from the hotel staff. Yes, I was sure it was my room. No, I'd never seen the man before. Yes, he definitely had a key card. The police searched my room but found no signs of forced entry. My suitcase was a mess, but as far as I could tell, nothing was missing. Not even my laptop or the cash I'd stupidly left in my bag. "It doesn't make sense," I said to the detective, taking my statement. "Why go through all that trouble if he wasn't going to steal anything?" The detective, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, shrugged. "Could be he was looking for something specific and didn't find it. Or maybe you interrupted him before he could take anything." But something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. The man hadn't seemed surprised or panicked when I first entered the room. It was almost as if he'd been expecting me as the police were preparing to leave the hotel. Manager approached me, wringing his hands nervously. "Miss Johnson, I can't apologize enough for this incident. We've comped your stay, of course. And if there's anything else we can do," I cut him off. "I want to see the security footage from the hallway outside my room in the lobby." He hesitated. "I'm not sure that's either. You show me or I call my lawyer," I said, surprising myself with my forcefulness. 20 minutes later, I was staring at grainy security footage of the hallway outside my room. We watched as the man approached my door, looked around furtively, then swiped a key card. The door opened smoothly for him. The door... How is this possible? The manager muttered more to himself than to me. But I was focused on something else just before he entered my room. The man looked directly at the camera and smiled. A chill ran down my spine. He wanted to be seen. We switched to the lobby footage, watching as the man calmly walked in through the front door about an hour before I returned. He approached the front desk, spoke briefly with the clerk, and was handed a key card. That's impossible. The night clerk who had joined said I never gave him a key. I've never even seen him before, but the footage didn't lie. Somehow this man had managed to get a key to my room right under the hotel staff's noses as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, despite the upgraded suite and extra security the hotel had provided. My mind kept replaying the events of the evening. Why my room? Why me? What had he been looking for? I tossed and turned, jumping in at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My hand shook as I opened it. Thanks for the chat. Emily, see you again. Soon my blood ran cold. I had never told him my name. I was out of the hotel within 10 minutes, my hastily packed suitcase bumping against my leg as I ran to my car. I drove through the night, checking my rearview mirror obsessively, half expecting to see headlights following me. As the sun began to rise, I pulled into a rest stop and tried to think rationally. I needed to call the police again to tell them about the text, but would they believe me? And even if they did, what could they do? My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number running. Won't help, Emily. I'll always find you in that moment. I made a decision. I turned off my phone, threw it in the trash, and got back on the road. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go home. Home was the first place he'd look as I drove into the brightening day. My mind raced with questions. Who was this man? What did he want from me, and how long would I have to run before I felt safe again? One thing was certain, my life as I knew it was over all because I opened a hotel room door and found a stranger inside. Now I was the stranger driving towards an uncertain future with the constant fear that every face I saw might be his. The open road stretched out before me, full of possibility and danger. I had become a fugitive from a threat I didn't understand. Running from a man whose name I didn't even know, but I was determined to survive, to unravel this mystery, and to reclaim my life no matter how long it took. As I passed a sign welcoming me to the next state, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The game was on, and I intended to win. The moment I saw the cabin nestled in the woods, I thought I'd found the perfect escape. Little did I know I was walking straight into a nightmare that would push me to the very edge of survival. I'd been planning this getaway for months. After a year of non-stop work and the messy end of a long-term relationship, I needed some time alone to decompress and rediscover myself when I stumbled across the listing for a secluded cabin with no Wi-Fi and limited cell service. It seemed like fate. The drive up was beautiful, all winding roads and autumn-painted trees. As I pulled up to the cabin, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. The place was rustic but charming, with a wide porch and windows that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. I was unloading my car when I first met Jim, the property's caretaker. He emerged from a path in the woods, startling me. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "I'm Jim. I look after the place." I nodded, trying to hide my surprise. "Nice to meet you, Jim. I didn't realize anyone would be around." He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't you worry about me. I've got my own place down the way. Just wanted to make sure you got in all right." Something about his smile made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as nerves from being in a new place. "Well, thanks," I said, hefting my bag. "I think I can manage from here." Jim nodded, his eyes lingering on me a beat too long. "You enjoy your stay now, Sarah. If you need anything at all, you just holler." I watched him disappear back into the woods, an inexplicable chill running down my spine. Despite the warm day, the inside of the cabin was just as charming as the outside. I spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, unpacking my books and art supplies. As the sun began to set, I made myself a simple dinner and curled up on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars come out. It was perfect, peaceful, exactly what I needed. That peace was shattered at 2 a.m. when I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. At first I thought I was dreaming scamming, but then I heard it again. The unmistakable creak of a floorboard under someone's weight. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up in bed, straining my ears in the darkness. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately, as if whoever it was didn't care if they were heard. They stopped in front of my bedroom window. I held my breath. Fear paralyzing me, a shadow fell across the moonlit floor as someone peered in. I caught a glimpse of a face. Jim's face before he moved away. My mind raced. What was he doing here in the middle of the night? I reached for my phone with trembling hands, only to remember the lack of service. I was alone, isolated with no way to call for help. The footsteps retreated and I heard the creak of the porch steps as Jim descended, but somehow I knew he wasn't leaving. He was waiting, watching. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I was up throwing my things into my bag. I had to get out of there. I was so focused on packing that I almost didn't hear the front door open. I froze, my heart pounding as heavy footsteps made their way through the cabin. Sarah, Jim's voice called out, far too cheerful for the early hour. "You up yet? Thought I'd bring you some fresh eggs for breakfast." I didn't answer, my eyes darting around the room for an escape route. The window, it wasn't a long drop to the ground, just as I was about to make a break for it. Jim appeared in the doorway. His eyes narrowed as he took in my half-packed bag. Going somewhere, he asked, all pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I got called back to work. Emergency. Jim stepped into the room, blocking my path to the door. "Now that's a shame," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe me, especially since there's no cell service up here. How'd they reach you? I wonder. I backed away, my legs hitting the edge of the bed. "Jim, I don't want any trouble, just let me leave." He shook his head, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Oh, Sarah, don't you know you're already in trouble?" What happened next was a blur of adrenaline and instinct as Jim lunged for me. I grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening crack, and he stumbled back, dazed. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I bolted past him out of the bedroom and towards the front door, but in my panic, I'd forgotten about the eggs he'd brought. The carton lay broken on the floor, and I slipped in the mess, crashing to the ground before I could get up. Jim was on me, his weight pinning me down. His hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing. "You shouldn't have done that, Sarah." He growled, his face inches from mine. We could have had such a nice time together. Black spots danced in my vision as I struggled for air in desperation. I reached out my hand, closing around a shard of the broken egg carton with the last of my strength. I jabbed it into Jim's eye. He howled in pain, releasing me as he clutched at his face. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air, and ran. I burst out of the cabin and into the woods, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from Jim. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, his enraged shouts echoing through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. The forest was a maze, every tree looking the same as the last. I had no idea where I was or which direction would lead me to safety. As I paused to catch my breath, I heard Jim's voice, and closer than I'd expected. "Sarah, you can't hide from me. This is my forest. I know every inch of it." Panic gave me a fresh burst of energy, and I took off again, but in my haste, I didn't see the roots sticking up from the ground. My foot caught it, and I went down hard, tumbling down a steep incline. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain as I tried to get up. A sharp pain shot through my ankle, sprained, maybe broken. I bit back a sob of frustration and fear. I could hear Jim getting closer. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide and spotted a hollow log a few feet away. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to wiggle inside, trying to quiet my ragged Brea breathing. Jim's footsteps crunched through the leaves, pausing at the top of the incline. "I know you're down there, Sarah," he called out, his voice sickeningly playful. "Why don't you come out and we can talk about this?" I pressed a hand over my mouth, willing myself to be silent. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to him make his way down the slope. "You know," he continued, his voice getting closer, You're not the first to try and run, but they all come back in the end. They always do. A chill ran through me at his words. How many others had there been? How long had he been doing this? His footsteps stopped right next to my hiding place. I could see his boots through a crack in the log. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me for what felt like an eternity. He stood there so close I could hear his breathing. Then finally he moved on. "I'll find you, Sarah," he called out as he walked away. "You can't hide forever." I waited until I couldn't hear him anymore before crawling out of the log. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the fear coursing through me. I knew I couldn't outrun him. Not in this condition. I needed a plan. Looking around, I spotted a sturdy branch that could serve as a makeshift crutch as I leaned on it. Testing my weight, an idea began to form. Jim thought he knew these woods better than anyone, but that was about to become his downfall over the next few hours. I set traps, tripwires made from vines, pitfalls covered with leaves. Anything I could think of to slow him down, or better yet, incapacitate him. As the sun began to set, I heard Jim's voice again, closer this time. "Getting dark. Sarah Woods can be dangerous at night. Why don't you come on out and we'll go back to the nice warm cabin?" I gritted my teeth, steeling myself. This ended now. I let him see me just for a moment before limping away. I heard him laugh, thinking he had me. That's right, Sarah, nowhere to run now. I led him on a merry chase, always staying just out of reach, leading him deeper into my trap. Laden section of the forest, I heard him curse as he tripped over one of my wires, then cry out in pain as he fell into a pitfall that was my chance. I turned and hobbled as fast as I could towards where I thought the road might be behind me. I could hear Jim enraged shouts growing fainter just when I thought my strength would give out. I saw at the glint of moonlight on metal, a car. The road I broke through the tree line, waving my arms frantically at the approaching headlights. The car screeched to a halt and a startled couple peered out at me. "Please," I gasped. "Help me call the police," as we sped away from the forest. My ordeal finally over, I couldn't help but think of Jim's words. How many others had there been? How many hadn't escaped? I made a silent bow then and there. Once I was safe, once Jim was behind bars, I would find out. I would make sure every one of his victims got justice. The cabin in the woods was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it became the battleground where I discovered just how strong I really was. And as the first police sirens began to wail in the distance, I knew my fight was far from over. I never thought a simple act of kindness could lead to the most terrifying night of my life. But as I sit here, hands still shaking, I realize that sometimes the monsters we fear aren't hiding under our beds. They're sitting right next to us in the passenger seat. It was close to midnight and I was driving home after a late shift at the hospital. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I was exhausted, my eyes stinging from the strain of focusing on the road. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the side of the road, thumb out, completely drenched. In the brief moment my headlights illuminated him, I saw a man probably in his mid-30s with a friendly face and a desperate look in his eyes. I knew I shouldn't stop. Every instinct, every warning I'd ever heard about the dangers of picking up strangers screamed at me to keep driving. But something, maybe the fatigue, maybe a misplaced sense of compassion, made me slow down. I pulled over, rolling down the passenger window. "Just a crack, you okay?" I called out over the sound of the rain. He jogged over, relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours." I hesitated for a moment, then made a decision I would come to regret. "Hop in," I said. Unlocking the door, "And where you headed?" He slid into the seat, water dripping from his clothes onto the upholstery. "Just to the next town," he said, flashing me a grateful smile. "I'm Tom, by the way, Sarah," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "You're lucky I came along. Not many people out at this hour." Tom nodded, running a hand through his wet hair. "Yeah, I was starting to lose hope. You're a real lifesaver, Sarah." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I snuck glances at Tom out of the corner of my eye. He seemed harmless enough, staring out the window with a relieved expression, so I said, trying to break the awkward silence, "What do you do for a living, Tom?" He turned to me, and for a split second I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold, but it was gone so quickly I thought I must have imagined it. "Oh, this and that." He said vaguely, "I'm between jobs at the moment. What about you? That looks like a nurse's uniform." I nodded, suddenly aware of how much information I was giving to a complete stranger. "Yeah, I work at St. Mary's, just finished a 12-hour shift." Tom's eyebrows raised. 12 hours, you must be exhausted. Maybe I should drive." A wave of unease washed over me. "No, that's okay, I'm used to it." He shrugged, but I noticed his eyes lingering on the steering wheel. "If you're sure, so you live around here?" I hesitated, then lied no. "Just passing through, visiting a friend." Tom nodded, but something in his expression told me he didn't believe me. The uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. We turned off the main road onto a narrower, less well-lit street. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the darkness. "This doesn't look like the way to town," I said, unable to keep the fear out of my voice. Tom's demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly facade dropped, replaced by something cold and calculating. "No," he said, his voice low and menacing. "It's not." My heart began to race. I gripped the steering. Wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I think you should get out now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "I don't think so, Sarah. We're going to keep driving, and you're going to take me exactly where I want to go." I saw him reach into his jacket, and my breath caught in my throat. Was he armed? I couldn't risk finding out in a moment of desperation. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet road. Fishtailing wildly, Tom was thrown forward, his head smacking against the dashboard. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I threw the car into park and scrambled for the door handle, but Tom recovered quicker than I anticipated. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm in a vice-like grip that wasn't very smart, Sarah. He growled, pulling me back. I fought against his grip, my free hand searching frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around my travel mug in the cup holder. Without thinking, I swung it at Tom's head. The mug connected with a sickening thud. Hot coffee splashed everywhere and Tom's grip loosened. I took the opportunity to R-wrench the door open and tumble out into the rain. The ground was slick and I slipped as I tried to run. I could hear Tom cursing behind me, the car door slamming as he gave chase. I ran blindly into the woods that lined the road, branches whipping at my face, my shoes sinking into the muddy ground. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I could hear Tom crashing through the underbrush behind me, getting closer with each passing second. He was bigger, stronger, and wasn't exhausted from a 12-hour shift just when I thought my legs would give out. I saw a glimmer of light through the trees. A house hope surged through me. Giving me a final burst of energy, I burst out of the tree line and into a small clearing. An old farmhouse stood before me, a single light burning in an upstairs window. I sprinted towards it, my feet slipping on the wet grass. I reached the porch and began pounding on the door. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Please, somebody help me!" I heard movement inside. Then the porch light flickered on. The door opened to reveal an elderly man, his eyes wide with concern. "Please?" I gasped. "Let me in, there's a man, he's trying to..." I didn't get to finish. A hand grabbed my shoulders, spinning me around. Tom stood there, his face twisted with rage, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where I'd hit him with the mug now. "Now, Sarah," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Don't go telling tales. We wouldn't want our new friend here to get the wrong idea." The elderly man looked between us, confusion and fear etched on his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "He's not who he says he is." I blurted out, "He made me drive him here. He's dangerous. Please call the police for a moment." Nobody moved then, quicker than I thought possible. The old man reached behind the door and pulled out a shotgun. He said, pointing the gun at Tom, "You get off my property." Now Tom's eyes darted between the gun and me. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Finally, he stepped back, hands raised. "This isn't over," he said, his eyes locked on mine. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The old man ushered me inside, locking the door behind us as the adrenaline wore off. I began to shake uncontrollably. The man's wife appeared, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders and pressing a cup of tea into my hands as her husband called the police. Hours later, after giving my statement to the police and watching them comb the woods for any sign of Tom, I sat in the farmhouse kitchen, still unable to believe what had happened. "You're lucky," the officer said as he finished taking my statement. "We've been looking for this guy for months. He's suspected in at least 3 abductions in the area." I nodded numbly, the full weight of what I'd escaped finally hitting me if I hadn't stopped when I did, if I hadn't fought back. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the rain-soaked landscape, I made a silent vow I would never pick up a hitchhiker again. No matter how harmless they looked, no matter how bad the weather, the kindness of strangers is a beautiful thing, but sometimes that kindness can be our undoing. I learned a hard lesson that night. The monsters we fear aren't always obvious. Sometimes they come with a friendly smile and a hard luck story, but I also learned that I was stronger than I ever knew, capable of fighting back when it mattered most. As I finally left the farmhouse, ready to drive home in the patrol car the officers had offered, I took one last look at the woods where I'd run for my life, somewhere out there. Tom was still lurking, but he hadn't broken me. He'd only made me stronger, more cautious, more aware, and if our paths ever crossed again, I'd be ready. Because now I knew the truth sometimes. The most dangerous predators are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for a moment of kindness to strike. The moment I heard that first unexplained noise, I should have packed my bags and left, but curiosity got the better of me, and now I'm trapped in a nightmare of my own making with no idea if I'll make it out alive. It all started on a Tuesday. I checked into the Pinewood Hotel for a week-long conference. Nothing out of the ordinary. The place was nice enough a bit. Dated but clean and quiet. Perfect for getting some work done in the evenings. The first 2 nights passed without incident, but on the third night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a soft thud, followed by what sounded like whispers coming from the room next door. I wouldn't have thought much of it except for one thing. I knew that room was empty. I'd seen the vacant sign on the door earlier that day. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The whispers continued, too muffled to make out any words, but definitely there then. As suddenly as they'd started, they stopped. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of the conference and too much coffee were playing tricks on my mind. But as I laid back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, I casually asked the front desk clerk if anyone had checked into the room next to mine. "No, sir," she said. Checking her computer, "That room's been empty all week. Is there a problem?" I forced a smile. No problem. Just curious." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the clerk's face for a split second. I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something, fear-guilt. But when I looked back, her expression was neutral. Professional that night, I was determined to get to the bottom of things. I stayed up late pretending to work on my laptop, but really listening intently for any sounds from next door. Around midnight, I heard it again. The thud, then the whispers. This time I was ready. I crept to the door, opened it as quietly as I could, and peered out into the hallway. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man in a hotel uniform was unlocking the door to the supposedly vacant room. But that wasn't what scared me. It was the look on his face, a mixture of dread and resignation, like a man walking to his execution. He glanced in my direction and our eyes met for a moment. We just stared at each other. Then he quickly entered the room, shutting the door behind him. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding. What had I just witnessed? Part of me wanted to go back to bed to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but a larger part knew I couldn't let this go. I waited until I was sure the coast was clear, then crept down to the lobby. It was deserted except for the night clerk, a different one from earlier, an older man with deep-set eyes and a permanent frown. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. I think I left something in the conference room. Could I get the key? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached under the desk and handed me a key card. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll bring it right back." He nodded, his eyes never leaving me as I walked away. The conference room was on the second floor. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The key card felt heavy in my hand, like it was burning a hole in my palm. I reached the conference room door and swiped the card. The lock clicked open, taking a deep breath. I stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of an exit sign. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. A group of people, hotel staff judging by their uniforms, were huddled around a table, speaking in hushed tones. They fell silent as I entered, all eyes turning to me. The tension in the room was palpable. "I'm sorry," I stammered, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what I'd stumbled into. "I think I'm in the wrong room." I turned to leave, but a hand grabbed my arm. I looked up to see the night clerk, his grip like iron. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be," he said, his voice low and ominous. "We've been expecting you." The next few hours were a blur of confusion and terror. The hotel staff, it turned out, were part of something much bigger and darker than I could have imagined. They spoke of ancient pacts of sacrifices needed to keep the hotel running, of guests who checked in but never checked out. I listened in horrified fascination as they explained how the hotel chose its victims, always lone travelers, always people who wouldn't be missed right away, how they used the empty rooms for their rituals, how they disposed of the bodies. "But why are you telling me all this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The night clerk, who I now knew was the leader of this twisted cult, smiled. "It was a cold, joyless thing because, Mr. Johnson, you've been chosen. You're going to help us with our next ritual." I tried to run, but they were ready for that. Strong hands grabbed me, holding me in place as the clerk approached with a syringe. "Don't worry," he said as he pushed the needle into my arm. "Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll be one of us." I woke up back in my room, my head pounding and my memories fuzzy. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible dream, but then I saw the bruise on my arm where the needle had gone in, and the full horror of my situation came crashing down on me. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, only to find it locked. My phone was gone, as was my laptop. I was trapped. The next few days were a nightmare of isolation and fear. Food appeared in my room at regular intervals, but I never saw who delivered it. The TV only showed static, and the phone was dead. I tried everything I could think of to escape picking the lock, trying to signal for help through the window, even attempting to break down the door. Nothing worked. On what I think was the 5th day, it was hard to keep track of time. The door finally opened. The night clerk stood there, flanked by 2 burly men in suits. "It's time, Mr. Johnson," he said. "Are you ready to join us?" I knew this was my only chance as they led me down the hallway. I pretended to stumble when one of the men moved to help me up. I hit him as hard as I could, then bolted. I ran like I've never run before, downstairs and through corridors. The sound of pursuit close behind me, I burst into the lobby, startling a group of new guests checking in. "Help," I screamed. "Call the police. They're trying to kill me." The guests looked at me in shock and confusion. The front desk clerk, the same young woman from my first day, picked up the phone for a moment. I thought I was saved. Then I saw her face. She wasn't calling the police, she was calling for backup. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran out of the hotel and into the street, not stopping until I couldn't run anymore. I'm in a small diner. Now using a borrowed phone to write this down. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I know what I saw. What I heard. The Pinewood Hotel is not what it seems. It's a front for something dark and terrible, and I'm afraid I'm not the first person to discover this, just the first to get away. If you're reading this and you're planning a stay at the Pinewood, my advice is simple. Don't find another hotel, and if you do end up there, whatever you do, don't ask about the noises in the night, don't investigate strange occurrences, and above all, don't trust the staff, because once you're in, once you know the truth, they'll never let you leave. I got lucky. I'm not sure the next person will. As for me, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Go to the police. They'll never believe me. Try to expose the hotel I'd be risking my life for now. All I can do is run and hope that somehow, someday, the truth about the Pinewood Hotel will come to light. But one thing's for certain, I'll never look at a hotel the same way again, because now I know that sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed. They're the ones handing you the room key with a smile. The first time I noticed something out of place, I brushed it off as forgetfulness. By the time I realized the truth, it was almost too late. I never imagined that house sitting could turn into a living nightmare. It started innocently enough. My college friend Sarah asked if I could watch her house for a month while she was on an extended business trip. The timing was perfect. I had just finished a freelance project and was between jobs, plus the idea of staying in a spacious suburban home instead of my cramped studio apartment was too good to pass up. The first week was uneventful. I settled into a routine, working on my laptop during the day and binge-watching Netflix in the evenings. Sarah's house was comfortable, if a bit too big for one person. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched, but I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place. It was on day 8 that I noticed the first oddity. I woke up and went to the kitchen to make coffee, only to find that the mug I'd left in the sink the night before was now sitting on the counter, clean and dry. I frowned, trying to remember if I'd washed it before bed. I must have. I decided I was just more tired than I thought, but then it happened again and again, small things easy to dismiss individually, but unsettling when viewed as a whole. A book I was sure I'd left on the coffee table would be back on the shelf. The TV remote would be on the other side of the room from where I'd left it. One morning, I came downstairs to find all the kitchen chairs pulled out from the table. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I sleepwalking, having memory lapses? I began taking photos of rooms before I went to bed, comparing them to how things looked in the morning. More often than not, there would be subtle differences by the third week. I was a nervous wreck. I'd started sleeping with the bedroom door locked, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. I considered calling Sarah, but what would I say? I think your house is moving things around at night. She'd think I was crazy. It was on a Tuesday night that everything came to a head. I'd had trouble falling asleep, tossing and turning for hours before finally drifting off. A noise jolted me awake, a soft thud like something being set down. Carefully, I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There it was again, a shuffling sound coming from downstairs. My heart began to race. This wasn't my imagination. There was someone in the house. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call 911, but as my fingers touched the screen, a horrible thought struck me. What if they'd cut the phone lines in movies? That's always what the intruders did. First, slowly, careful not to make a sound, I got out of bed. I needed to see what I was dealing with. I crept to the bedroom door and pressed my ear against it. The shuffling had stopped, but now I could hear something else breathing. Breathing, slow, steady breathing just on the other side of the door. I stumbled back, clapping a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a heavy glass vase on the dresser. I grabbed it, hefting its weight in my hands as I backed away from the door. The door opened with agonizing slowness. I raised the face, ready to strike, but what I saw in the doorway made me freeze in shock. It wasn't a burglar, it wasn't a serial killer. It was a man, but not like any man I'd ever seen. He was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for his body. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were black voids, pupilless and empty. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke, his voice a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once you weren't supposed to see me. The vase slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over us. The man-creature, in whatever it was, lunged forward with inhuman speed. I don't remember deciding to move one moment. I was frozen in terror the next. I was shoving past him, running down the hallway towards the stairs. I could hear him behind me, his breathing raspy and excited. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste. My only thought was to get out to get to my car and drive as far away as possible, but as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The front door was gone. Where it should have been was just a blank wall. I spun around looking for another way out, but everywhere I looked, things were wrong. The layout of the house had changed. Doors that should have led outside now opened into more rooms. Windows showed only darkness beyond, as if the house was floating in a void. "You can't leave," the voice said behind me. "None of us can." I turned to face him, pressing my back against the wall. "What are you talking about? What is this place?" He tilted his head, regarding me with those empty black eyes. "This house, it's alive. It feeds on us, on our fear, our despair. It's been so long since it had someone new to play with." "No," I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "This isn't real. It can't be." He took a step closer, and I noticed for the first time that his feet didn't quite touch the ground. "I've been here for, I don't know how long, decades, maybe centuries. Time doesn't work, right? Here the house let me see you, let me move things around. It was toying with you, savoring your growing fear." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "But Sarah, this is her house. She lives here." The creature that was once a man let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Sarah isn't real. She's just a lure, a fiction created by the house to bring in new victims. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." I felt my legs give way, and I slid down the wall to the floor. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. I'd wake up any moment now, back in my own apartment, and laugh at how ridiculous this all was, but I didn't wake up. Instead, the creature knelt down in front of me, its face inches from mine. "I'm sorry," it said, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of humanity in those bottomless eyes. "I tried to warn you, to scare you away, but the house, it's too strong. It always wins." As if in response to his words, the house groaned around us. The walls seemed to ripple, and I felt a sensation like the floor was tilting beneath me. "What's happening?" I gasped, scrambling to my feet. The creature stood as well, looking around with what seemed like resignation. "It's changing again, it does. This rearranges itself each time. It's different. Each time we have to learn it all over again." I watched in horror as the walls began to shift doors, disappearing and reappearing in new locations. The staircase twisted, turning into a spiral that led up into darkness. And all around us I began to hear whispers, countless voices, some pleading, some screaming, some laughing maniacally. "The others," the creature said, noticing my reaction to the sounds, "all trapped like us. Sometimes we see each other, sometimes we don't. The house decides." I shook my head, still unable to fully comprehend what was happening. "There has to be a way out. We can't just give up for the first time." I saw something like pity in the creature's expression. "Oh, we don't give up. We keep trying, keep searching, but the house it enjoys. That our hope, our desperate attempts to escape, it's all part of the game." As the house's transformation slowed, I found myself in what looked like a long corridor lined with doors. Each one was different. Some old and weathered, others sleek and modern. The creature stood at the far end, already beginning to fade into the shadows. "Wait," I called out. "What do I do now?" Its voice came back to me, growing fainter with each word. "Survive, explore, and whatever you do, don't trust what you see. Nothing here is what it seems." And then it was gone, leaving me alone in the impossible corridor. I stood there for a long time, trying to come to terms with my new reality. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some elaborate hoax or hallucination, but deep down I knew the truth. I was trapped, caught in the grip of something beyond my understanding. Finally, I took a deep breath and looked at the doors stretching out before me. Each one could lead to salvation or damnation. There was no way to know, with no other choice. I stepped forward and grasped the handle of the nearest door. As I turned it, I silently vowed that I wouldn't become like the creature I'd met. I wouldn't let this house break me somehow, someway. I would find a way out. The door swung open, revealing a room that defied the laws of physics. And as I stepped through, I realized that my nightmare was only just beginning. The moment I overheard those whispered words, I knew my ordinary night shift had just become a matter of life and death. Little did I know serving coffee at 2 a.m. would be the least of my worries. My name's Amy, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Mel's 24-hour diner for about 6 months now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me time to work on my novel during the slow hours. Most nights, it's just me, the cook, and a handful of regulars. Truckers passing through, college students pulling all-nighters. The occasional insomniac looking for a slice of pie and a sympathetic ear. This particular night started like any other. I was wiping down the counter for the 800th time, half listening to the oldie station playing softly in the background when the bell over the door chimed. I looked up, plastering on my best customer service smile, only to have it falter slightly at the sight of the newcomers. There were 4 of them, all men dressed in dark clothes that seemed a little too nice for our greasy spoon establishment. They slid into a booth in the far corner, talking in low voices and glancing around nervously. I grabbed some menus and headed over, my instincts telling me something was off about this group. As I approached, I caught a snippet of their conversation. Shipment comes in at dawn. We need to be ready. They fell silent as soon as they noticed me fixing me with hard stares that made my skin crawl. Welcome to Mel's, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Can I start you gentlemen off with some coffee? The man closest to me, a burly guy with a scar running down his left cheek, nodded curtly. Coffee black for all of us. I jotted it down even though it was unnecessary just to have something to do with my hands. I'll be right back with that. Take your time with the menus. As I walked back to the counter, I could feel their eyes on me. My mind was racing. What kind of shipment were they talking about, and why did they look so nervous? I poured their coffees with shaking hands, trying to act normal when I brought the mugs over. They had pushed the menus aside, untouched anything to eat. I asked more out of habit than expectation. The man with the scar shook his head. Just the coffee and some privacy. I nodded and retreated, my heart pounding as soon as I was back behind the counter. I pulled out my phone ready to call the police, but what would I say? I had no real evidence of anything illegal, just a bad feeling and a fragment of an overheard conversation. I decided to wait to see if I could learn more. I busied myself with mindless tasks, all the while keeping an ear tuned to their booth. Their voices were too low to make out words, but their tone was urgent. Intense. About an hour passed. This way, the men nursed their coffees, heads bent close together in discussion. Occasionally, one would glance my way, and I'd quickly avert my eyes, pretending to be absorbed in restocking napkin dispensers or organizing menus. Then everything changed in an instant. The bell over the door chimed again, and 2 police officers walked in. It was a common enough sight. Cops often stopped by for coffee during their night patrols, but the reaction from the men in the booth was immediate and alarming. They stiffened hands, disappearing under the table. I saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of terror that they were armed. The next few moments seemed to unfold in slow motion. The cops, oblivious to the tension, ambled up to the counter. The men in the booth were coiled like springs, ready to act. And I stood frozen between them, suddenly understanding that I was the only thing preventing a bloodbath in my diner. I had to do something, and fast taking a deep breath, I stepped towards the cops, positioning myself. So my back was to the booth. I pitched my voice louder than necessary, hoping the men would hear every word. "Officers, great to see you. Your usual?" I asked, trying to communicate with my eyes that something was wrong. The older cop, Dave, who'd been coming here for years, picked up on my distress immediately. His hand casually moved to rest on his holster. "Actually, Amy, we got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. You seen anything unusual tonight?" I shook my head, acutely aware of the men behind me. "No, sir, it's been a quiet night. Just a few regulars and some folks passing through." I emphasized the last part, hoping he'd understand. Dave nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the diner. "Well, we'll take a quick look around if you don't mind. Standard procedure." "Of course," I said, relief washing over me. "Coffee's on the house tonight." As the cops moved towards the booth, I heard the scrape of chairs. The men were standing up, tension radiating off them in waves. "Gentlemen," Dave said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Mind. If we have a word." What happened next was a blur of motion and noise. 2 of the men bolted for the door. Another reached for something in his jacket. I heard someone yell, "Gun," and then the deafening sound of gunshots filled the air. I dove behind the counter, my hands over my ears, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. There was more shouting, the sound of breaking glass, and then suddenly silence. When I finally found the courage to peek over the counter, the scene that greeted me was one of chaos. Tables were overturned, coffee mugs shattered on the floor. The two cops had had one man in handcuffs while another lay motionless near the door. Dave came over to me, his face. "Grim, you okay, Amy?" I nodded. Not trusting my voice, "You did good," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Real good, your call saved lives tonight." I looked at him confused. "My call," he smiled slightly. "The one you made an hour ago reporting suspicious customers?" That's why we were here. I hadn't made any call, but I understood immediately. Dave had given me an out a way to explain my actions without putting me in danger of retaliation. The next few hours were a whirlwind of police statements, crime scene investigators, and a parade of official look people in suits. I learned bits and pieces of what had happened. The men were part of a drug trafficking ring. The shipment they were waiting for was a large quantity of heroin by pure chance. I had stumbled upon a major operation and inadvertently helped bring it down as dawn broke, casting a surreal glow over the crime scene tape and police cars. I sat on the curb outside the diner, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. Dave came and sat beside me. "Hell of a night, huh?" he said, handing me a cup of coffee not from the diner. Thankfully, I nodded, taking a sip. I can't believe, I never thought that's the thing about this job, and yours too. I guess Dave said you never know what a shift might bring you. Handled yourself well in there, Amy? Ever consider a career in law enforcement? I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical to my own ears. I think I'll stick to slinging hash and writing my novel. Thanks, Dave. Smiled. Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. He stood up, brushing off his pants. Get some rest. We'll need you to come down to the station later for a formal statement. As he walked away, I stared at the diner, my familiar workplace now transformed into something alien and threatening. I knew I'd never see it the same way again. Every customer would be a potential threat. Every overheard conversation a possible crime in the making. But as the adrenaline faded and exhaustion set in, I realized something else. I had faced the worst night of my life and come out the other side. I had potentially saved lives. And if I was being honest with myself, I had just lived through the most exciting experience of my life. I stood up, letting the shock blanket fall away. Maybe I wouldn't quit my job after all. Maybe I had found the inspiration I needed to finally finish my novel. After all, they say write what you know, and now I knew more than I ever bargained for as I walked to my car. The first light of day painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I couldn't help but smile. Life at the diner would never be the same, but then again, neither would I. The moment we stepped into that abandoned house to escape the storm, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake, but by the time we realized the true horror of our situation, it was already too late to turn back. It was supposed to be a fun family road. Trip me, my wife Sarah, and our two kids, Emma 10 and Jack 8. We'd been driving for hours trying to outrun a massive storm system that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. "Dave, we need to stop." Sarah said, her knuckles white as she gripped the dashboard. "It's not safe to keep driving like this." I nodded, squinting through the windshield. "You're right. I'll pull over at the next town we see," but as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that we were in the middle of nowhere. No towns, no gas stations, not even a barn where we could wait out the storm, just endless stretches of dark, rain-soaked countryside. That's when we saw it, a large Victorian-style house looming out of the gloom. It stood alone on a small hill, silhouetted against the stormy sky by a flash of lightning. "Look," Emma pointed excitedly, "a house." "Can we stop there, Dad?" I hesitated. The place looked abandoned, and something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But another crack of thunder, followed by a worried whimper from Jack in the back seat, made up my mind for me. "Okay," I said, turning onto the long, overgrown driveway, "but we'll just stay until the storm passes." As we pulled up to the house, I could see that it was in even worse shape than I'd initially thought. Paint peeled from the wooden siding and several windows were boarded up. The porch sagged ominously as if it might collapse under its own weight at any moment. "Are you sure about this?" Dave Sarah asked. Eyeing the house wearily as we got out of the car, I, for a smile, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "It'll be fine. We'll just wait inside until the worst of the storm blows over." We dashed through the rain to the porch, the old boards creaking under our feet. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging open with a spine-chilling creak when I pushed it hello, I called out, peering into the darkness. "Beyond, is anyone here?" No response. I pulled out my phone using its flashlight to illuminate the entryway. Dust motes danced in the beam and I could see cobwebs in the corners. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. "Well," I said, trying to sound cheerful for the kids, "Seg, looks like we've got the place to ourselves. Let's see if we can find some candles or a fireplace to warm up." We moved further into the house, our wet shoes leaving tracks on the grimy hardwood floor. The interior was a M of old furniture draped in sheets, peeling wallpaper and musty smells, but it was dry and that was all that mattered for now. In what must have been the living room, we found an old stone fireplace. After some rummaging, I managed to find some relatively dry logs and got a small fire going. The kids huddled close to the warmth, their earlier excitement replaced by quiet unease. "I don't like this place." "You, Daddy?" Jack said, his lower lip trembling slightly. "It feels scary." I ruffled his hair, trying to reassure him. "It's just an old house, buddy, nothing to be afraid of." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. Sarah must have sensed my unease. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Maybe we should try to find a bedroom, get the kids settled for the night." I nodded, grateful for the suggestion. We gathered the kids and headed upstairs, the ancient staircase groaning under our weight. The second floor was just as dilapidated as the first, with long hallways lined with closed doors. We chose the first bedroom. We came to a large room with a massive four-poster bed still intact. The mattress was musty but dry, and we decided it would do for the night. As Sarah got the kids ready for bed, I decided to do a quick sweep of the rest of the upstairs just to ease my own mind. Most of the rooms were in similar states of decay, filled with broken furniture and decades of dust. But when I reached the last door at the end of the hall, something made me pause. Unlike the other doors, this one was in pristine condition, its wood gleaming as if it had just been polished, the brass doorknob. Shone in the beam of my FL flashlight against my better judgment, I reached out and turned the knob. The door swung open silently, revealing a room that took my breath away. Unlike the rest of the house, this room looked like it was frozen in time. Everything was immaculate, from the neatly made bed to the books arranged perfectly on the shelves. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere, but what really caught my attention was the doll. It sat in a small chair by the window, its porcelain face illuminated by a flash of lightning. Its glass eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, and its painted smile sent a chill down my spine. I backed out of the room quickly, shutting the door behind me. My heart was racing, and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm myself down. It was just a room, I told myself, just an old doll, nothing to be afraid of when I returned to our room. Sarah was just tucking the kids into bed. "Everything okay?" she asked. Noticing my pale face, I nodded, not wanting to worry her. "Yeah, just tired. It's been a long day." We settled in for the night, the sound of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder lulling us into an uneasy sleep. I woke with a start, unsure of what had disturbed me. The room was pitch black, the fire having long since died out. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized what had woken me. The sound of footsteps coming from the hallway outside our room. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Wake up, do you hear that?" She stirred, blinking in confusion. "Hear what?" But before I could answer, we both heard it. A child's laughter echoing through the house. It wasn't Emma or Jack. They were both still sound asleep in the bed beside us. Dave Sarah's voice was trembling. "What's going on?" I got out of bed, moving quietly to the door. "I don't know, stay here with the kids. I'll check it out." Ignoring Sarah's protests, I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The laughter came again this time. From downstairs, I followed the sound, my bare feet silent on the old floorboards as I reached the bottom of the stairs. I froze there in the middle of the living room stood a little girl. She was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown, her long hair hanging loose down her back. She was facing away from me, looking at something I couldn't see. "Hello?" I said softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you lost slowly?" So slowly it seemed to take an eternity. The girl turned to face me. I stumbled back. A scream caught in my throat. Her face was identical to the doll's upstairs, porcelain white with glass eyes and a painted smile. But unlike the doll, this face was alive, those glass eyes blinking as they focused on me. "You shouldn't have come here." The girl said, her voice a mixture of childish sweetness and something far older, far darker. "This is our home, and now you can never leave." As if on cue, doors began slamming throughout the house. I heard Sarah's scream from upstairs and the terrified cries of Emma and Jack. I turned to run back to them, but the staircase was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The girl's laughter echoed around me, multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere. At once the room began to shift and warp, the walls stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. I saw faces in the wallpaper, heard whispers in the floorboards, "Welcome home." The girl said, her smile widening unnaturally. "We've been waiting for a new family for so long I woke up with a gasp drenched in cold sweat." Sarah was shaking me, her face pale with worry. "Dave, wake up, you were having a nightmare." I looked around wildly. We were still in the bedroom, the kids sleeping peacefully beside us outside. The storm had passed and the first light of dawn was peeking through the dusty windows. "We need to leave," I said, jumping out of bed now. Sarah didn't argue. Something in my voice or my face must have conveyed the urgency I felt. We woke the kids and packed up quickly, practically running to the car as we drove away. I couldn't help but look back at the house in the rear-view mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a small figure standing in one of the upstairs windows, a porcelain hand raised in farewell. But when I blinked, it was gone. We never spoke about that night again, but sometimes in my dreams, I still hear that child's laughter, still see those glass eyes watching me, and I wonder with a chill that never quite goes away. What might have happened if we'd stayed just a little bit longer in that house that was never meant to be found the moment I noticed the first hidden camera? I knew my relaxing Airbnb getaway had just become a living nightmare. What I didn't realize was that this discovery was only the beginning of a terror that would change my life forever. I'd been looking forward to this vacation for months. After a grueling year at work, I desperately needed some time away from the hustle and bustle of city life. When I stumbled upon the listing for a cozy cabin in the woods, it seemed perfect, quaint, secluded, and best of all, affordable. The host, Tom, had excellent reviews praising his hospitality and attention to detail. As I pulled up to the cabin, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The place was even more charming in person, with its rustic wooden exterior and wraparound porch. Tom was there too, to greet me, all smiles and warm handshakes. "Welcome, Sarah," he said. "Helping me with my bags, I hope you'll find everything to your liking. I've prepared a little welcome basket for you inside." I thanked him already, feeling more relaxed. Tom gave me a quick tour of the cabin, pointing out all the amenities, the fully stocked kitchen, the fireplace, the luxurious bathroom with a clawfoot tub. He was charismatic in a temp, answering all my questions with patience. "Well, I'll leave you to settle in," Tom said finally. "Remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need anything. Enjoy your stay," as he drove away. I couldn't believe my luck. The place was perfect, and Tom seemed like the ideal host. I spent the rest of the evening unpacking, exploring the cabin, and finally sinking into the plush sofa with a glass of wine and a good book. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed something odd. I was in the bathroom fixing my hair when a glint of something in the mirror caught my eye. At first I thought it was just a reflection of light, but as I leaned in closer, my blood ran cold. There, nestled in the frame of the mirror, was a tiny camera lens. My mind raced. Surely this was a mistake. Maybe it was some sort of smart home device. I didn't understand, but as I examined it closer, there was no denying what it was. A hidden camera perfectly positioned to capture the entire bathroom with shaking hands. I grabbed my phone to call the police, only to realize I had no signal. Of course, I thought bitterly, I'm in the middle of nowhere, trying to calm my racing heart. I decided to check the rest of the cabin. Maybe this was just a one-off thing, a mistake. But as I moved from room to room, I found more cameras. One in the bedroom hidden in a potted plant, another in the living room disguised as a smoke detector, even one in the kitchen tucked away in the coffee maker. Panic set in as the reality of my situation became clear. I was being watched every move, every private moment, all captured on camera. But why and by whom Tom it had to be? Tom, the overly friendly host with the 2 perfect reviews. How many other guests had he spied on? How long had this been going on? I knew I had to get out of there fast. I started throwing my things into my suitcase, not bothering to fold or organize. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car pulling up outside. Peering through the curtains, my heart sank. It was Tom's truck. He wasn't supposed to be back until the end of my stay unless he'd been watching and saw that I discovered his cameras. I looked around frantically for a way out. The front door was out of the question. He'd see me for sure. The back door, LED straight into the dense woods, but without knowing the area, I could easily get lost. My only option was to hide and hope he'd leave. I ducked into the bedroom closet just as I heard the front door open. Tom's footsteps echoed through the cabin, slow and deliberate. "Sarah," he called out, his voice sickly. "Sweet, are you here? I just wanted to check if everything was all right." I held my breath, pressing myself further back into the closet. The footsteps grew closer. "I know you're here. Sarah." Tom's voice had lost its friendly edge. "I saw you finding the cameras. We need to talk about this." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The bedroom door creaked open and I could see Tom's shadow through the slats of the closet door. "Come on out, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be in that moment." I knew I had to act as Tom's hand reached for the closet door. I burst out, shoving him with all my might. He stumbled backward, surprise written all over his face. I didn't wait to see if he'd regain his balance. I ran out of the bedroom, through the living room, and straight out the front door. I could hear Tom behind me shouting, in his footsteps pounding on the wooden floors. The gravel driveway crunched under my feet as I sprinted towards my car. Just as I reached for the door handle, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. I spun around, coming face to face with Tom. His earlier charm was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You shouldn't have done that, Sarah," he growled. "Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into?" I struggled against his grip, my mind racing for a way out. That's when I remembered my car keys. They were still in my pocket. With my free hand, I reached in and grabbed them, fumbling for the panic button. The shrill alarm pierced the air, startling Tom enough for me to wrench my arm free. I used the moment of distraction to knee him in the groin. He doubled over in pain, and I took the opportunity to jump in my car, locking the doors behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Tom was recovering, stumbling towards the car with a look of murderous rage. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse tires, squealing as I backed out of the driveway. As I sped down the dirt road leading away from the cabin, I could see Tom in my rearview mirror growing smaller and smaller, but the fear didn't subside. How many other cabins did he have? How many other unsuspecting guests were being watched right now? I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached the nearest police station. The officers listened to my story with growing concern. Immediately dispatching units to the cabin, they took my statement, collected evidence from my phone where I'd taken pictures of the hidden cameras, and assured me they'd investigate thoroughly in the days that followed. The true scope of Tom's operation came to light: multiple properties, hundreds of hours of footage, countless victims. The media had a field day with the story, dubbing it the cabin voyeur case. I was asked to do interviews to share my experience, but I declined. I just wanted to forget. But forgetting proved impossible. Every hotel room, every rental property became a source of paranoia. I found myself checking for cameras everywhere I went, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Nightmares plagued my sleep visions of Tom's face and of hidden lenses capturing my every move months past, and slowly I began to reclaim my life. Therapy helped, as did the support of friends and family. I became an advocate for stricter regulations on short-term rentals and better protections for guests. It wasn't much, but it helped me feel like I was taking back some control now. As I sit in my own home surrounded by walls I know are safe, I can't help but reflect on how quickly trust can be shattered. That Airbnb list had promised a peaceful getaway, a chance to relax and recharge. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that opened my eyes to a dark underbelly of the hospitality world I never knew existed. I still travel, still stay in hotels and rentals, but now I carry with me a small device that detects hidden cameras. Some might call it paranoid, but for me it's a small price to pay for peace of mind. Because I know firsthand that sometimes the real danger isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. The experience changed me. There's no denying that. But it also made me stronger, more aware, and more determined to protect not just myself, but others who might fall victim to predators like Tom. If my story can save even one person from going through what I did then, perhaps some good can come from those terrifying days in the cabin. As I finish writing this, I realize that the fear may never fully go away, but I won't let it control me. I'll keep living, keep traveling, and keep fighting to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, because in the end, the greatest victory is not letting the monsters win. The moment I realized I wasn't alone in the wilderness, my solo camping trip turned into a nightmare. I couldn't escape what started as an adventure to find myself became a desperate fight to survive. With an unseen predator stalking my every move, I'd always been an avid hiker, but this was my first time attempting a week-long solo. Trek through the backcountry, the Appalachian Trail seemed like the perfect challenge. Beautiful, remote, and just dangerous enough to be exciting. I'd prepared for months, gathering the best lightweight gear, studying maps, and getting into the best shape of my life. The first 2 days were everything I hoped for. The solitude was refreshing. The scenery breathtaking. I reveled in the silence broken only by birdsong and the crunch of leaves under my boots as I set up camp on the second night. Watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. It was on the third day that things started to change. At first, it was just a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck like I was being watched. I dismissed it as paranoia, the natural unease of being alone in the wild. But as the day wore on, the feeling intensified. I started noticing small things. A twig snapping when I hadn't moved the rustle of leaves when there was no wind. Once I could have sworn I saw a shadow move between the trees, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there that night. As I huddled in my tent, every sound from the forest seemed amplified. The hooting of an owl made me jump, the scurrying of a small animal near my tent had me reaching for my flashlight, heart pounding. I tried to rationalize my fear, telling myself it was just the normal sounds of the woods at night, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I woke at dawn, groggy from a restless night, as I emerged from my tent. I froze there in the soft dirt around my campsite were footprints. Human footprints, and they didn't match my boots. My blood ran cold as I examined the prints. They circled my tent, coming close enough that whoever made them could have touched the fabric. The thought of someone standing there while I slept unaware and vulnerable made me feel sick. I packed up camp in record time, my hand shaking as I stuffed gear into my backpack. All thoughts of continuing my trip were gone. I just wanted to get back to civilization, back to safety. But as I started hiking, I realized my ordeal was far from over. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Every few minutes I'd spin around, certain I'd catch a glimpse of my stalker, but the trail behind me was always empty as the day wore on. I began to notice other signs. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss. There are small things easy to overlook if you weren't looking for them, but to my heightened senses they screamed of pursuit. I picked up my pace, ignoring the burning in my legs and the sweat soaking through my clothes. The nearest town was still 2 days away at my planned pace, but I was determined to make it in one I didn't dare stop for more than a few minutes at a time, just long enough to gulp some water and catch my breath. As afternoon faded into evening, my situation went from bad to worse. Dark clouds rolled in, and soon the woods were filled with the rumble of thunder. The rain started as a drizzle, but quickly turned into a downpour. Within minutes, I was soaked to the skin, the trail turning into a muddy mess under my feet. I knew I should stop, set up my tent, and wait out the storm, but the fear of what or who was behind me drove me on. I stumbled through the darkness, my headlamp casting eerie shadows that seemed to move and shift in the corners of my vision. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the trail ahead, and I saw something that made my heart stop. There, not 20 feet in front of me, was a figure tall, unnaturally thin, its outline blurred by the rain. For a split second our eyes met, or at least I thought they did where its eyes should have been. There were only dark, empty sockets. I screamed the sound of lost in a crack of thunder. I turned and ran, no longer caring about the trail, no longer caring about anything except getting away from that thing. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear something moving behind me, keeping pace effortlessly. Despite the difficult terrain, my foot caught on a root and I went down hard, tumbling down a steep incline. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain. As I lay there, the rain pelting my face, and I heard its footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the hill towards me. I tried to get up, but my ankle exploded in pain. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I could feel its presence looming over me. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I rolled over. There was nothing there. I blinked, confused. Had I imagined it all? Was this all some fear-induced hallucination? A twig snapped to my left and I whipped my head around. Nothing. Another snap, this time to my right again. Nothing. It was toying with me. I realized whatever this thing was, it was enjoying my fear, gritting my teeth against the pain. I forced myself to my feet. I couldn't just lie there and wait for it to finish its game. I had to keep moving. I limped forward, using trees for support. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound was a potential attack. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but I was shivering uncontrollably, as much from fear as from cold. As I stumbled along, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some psychopath hunting humans for sport, a deranged hermit driven mad by isolation, or was it something else entirely, something not quite human? I didn't have time to dwell on these questions for long. Ahead, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Civilization, safety. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the protests of my battered body. The light grew brighter, resolving into the glow of electric lights, a ranger station with a final burst of energy. I burst out of the tree line. The station was there, solid and real, its windows bright against the darkness of the forest. I half ran, half limped to the door, pounding on it with what little strength I had left. Help, I croaked, my voice horror from hours of panicked breathing. Please, someone help me. The door opened and I nearly fell into the arms of a startled-looking park ranger. Whoa there, he said, helping me inside. What happened to you? I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a confused jumble. The footprints, the chase, the figure, and the lightning. The ranger listened, his expression growing more concerned by the second. Okay, slow down, he said, guiding me to a chair. You're safe now. Let's get you warmed up and then we'll figure this out. As he wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and pressed a mug of hot coffee into my hands, I couldn't help but glance out the window. The forest pressed close to the station. Dark and impenetrable was it still out there watching. Waiting. The next few days were a blur of police statements and medical checkups. They found my abandoned campsite, confirming at least part of my story, but there was no sign of my pursuer, no evidence of anyone else in the area. Most people seemed to think I'd gotten spooked by normal forest sounds and let my imagination run wild. A few suggested I might have had some kind of stress-induced breakdown. Only the park ranger who found me seemed to take my story seriously. "These woods are old," he told me quietly when no one else was around. "They hold secrets, things that most people wouldn't believe. Whatever you saw out there, just be glad you made it out." As I finally headed home, my ankle in a brace and my nerves still frayed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ordeal wasn't over sometimes. When I close my eyes, I can still see that figure in the lightning flash. Still feel those empty sockets staring into my soul. I don't know if I'll ever go camping again. The wilderness, once a source of peace and adventure, now holds only terror for me. But I know one thing for certain: whatever was out there in those woods, it was real. And somewhere deep in the dark forests of the Appalachian Trail, it's still waiting, watching, hunting for now. I'll stick to the safety of the city, but part of me knows that someday, somehow, I'll have to face those woods again, because until I do, until I confront whatever it was that chased me through the rain and darkness, I'll never truly be free of the fear that now shadows my every step. The wilderness may have won this round, but the game, I fear, is far from. Over the moment I heard those inexplicable noises coming from the supposedly empty floor, I knew my mundane night shift was about to take a terrifying turn. Little did I know what I was about to discover would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Mike, and I've been working as a night janitor at Carlisle Associates for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my screenplay during the quiet hours. The building is one of those generic office towers, all glass and steel, with 50 floors of cubicles, conference rooms, and corner offices. On this particular night, I was going about my usual routine. I'd started on the ground floor and was working my way up floor by floor. It was my numbing work. But I'd gotten used to the solitude. The only sounds were the hum of the vacuum cleaner and the occasional ping of the elevator. I was on the 37th floor when I first heard it, a thud followed by what sounded like muffled voices. I froze my hand still on the vacuum's handle. The 37th floor was supposed to be empty. Hell, the whole building was supposed to be empty at this hour. I switched off the vacuum, straining my ears in the sudden silence. There it was again, definitely voices coming from the floor above. My heart started to race. Were we being robbed? Should I call security? I debated with myself for a moment. If it was just some employees working late, I'd feel like an idiot for raising an alarm, but something in my gut told me this wasn't normal. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I left the vacuum where it was and made my way to the stairwell. As I climbed the stairs to the 38th floor, the voices grew louder. I could make out at least 2 distinct speakers, though I couldn't understand what they were saying. I reached the door to the 38th floor and hesitated, my hand on the handle. What if they were armed? What if I was walking into something dangerous? But curiosity won out over caution, and I slowly eased the door open. Wincing at every creak, the 38th floor was laid out like all the others, a maze of cubicles surrounding a central area with conference rooms, but unlike the other floors, this one wasn't dark. A faint light spilled out from one of the conference rooms, casting long shadows across the office. I crept forward, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. As I got closer to the lit room, the voices became clearer. "Shipment comes in tomorrow night. We need to be ready." "What about security? Johnson's been sniffing around." "Don't worry about Johnson. He's been taken care of." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just some late-night meeting. Whatever was happening here, it was illegal and potentially dangerous. I inched closer, trying to peer into the room without being seen. Through the gap in the door, I could make out 3 men. They were gathered around a table covered in papers and what looked like blueprints. One of them was pointing at something on the table, speaking in low, urgent tones. "The boss wants this to go smoothly. No mistakes this time. Got it?" The others nodded, their faces grim. I leaned in, trying to get a better look at what was on the table. That's when disaster struck my foot, caught on a loose piece of carpet, and I stumbled. I managed to catch myself before falling, but my elbow knocked against the wall with a dull thud. The voices in the room instantly went silent. I heard chairs scraping against the floor and footsteps approaching the door. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of there fast. I turned and ran. Not caring about stealth anymore behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of the conference room door banging open. I sprinted towards the stairwell, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and those men as possible. I burst through the stairwell door and started down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear footsteps above me getting closer. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. I had just reached the 30th floor when I heard the stairwell door of above me slam open there. "He is," a voice shouted. The footsteps grew louder, faster. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my feet barely touching the stairs as I descended 25th floor, 20th, 15th. My pursuers were gaining on me. I could hear their heavy breathing, their shouts getting closer as I reached the 10th floor. A crazy idea struck me. Instead of continuing down, I burst out. Onto the floor, I sprinted through the dark office, weaving between desks and cubicles. I could hear them behind me, cursing as they tried to navigate the unfamiliar space. I made it to the other side of the floor and found what I was looking for, the second stairwell. I yanked the door open and started down again. With any luck, they'd waste precious time searching the 10th floor before realizing I'd switched stairs. My luck held. By the time I heard them enter the second stairwell, I was already at the ground floor. I exploded out of the stairwell and into the lobby, startling the night security guard at his desk. "Call the police." I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. There are men upstairs there. Before I could finish, the stairwell door burst open again. Two men rushed out, their faces contorted with rage. They skidded to a stop when they saw the security guard who was already on his feet. One hand on his weapon. For a moment, we all stood frozen, a tableau of confusion and fear. Then one of the men smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made my blood run cold. "There seems to be some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Our friend here," he gestured at me, "had a bit too much to drink at the office party. We were just trying to make sure he got home safely." The security guard looked uncertain, his eyes darting between me and the two men. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him what I'd really seen, but the words died in my throat as I saw the second man slowly reach into his jacket. In that moment, I made a decision. I turned and ran, bursting through the lobby doors and out into the night. I heard shouts behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, until I was sure I'd lost them. I ended up in a 24-hour diner, shaking and covered in sweat as I sat there trying to decide what to do. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "We know who you are. Keep quiet if you want to stay healthy." My blood ran cold. How had they found my number? What else did they know about me? I spent the rest of the night in a haze of paranoia, jumping at every sound, convinced that every passing car was there to get me. When dawn finally broke, I made my way to the police station, but as I stood outside ready to go in and report what I'd seen, doubt crept in. Would they believe me? I had no proof. Just my word against theirs, and if these men were as connected as they seemed would. Going to the police just put me in more danger. In the end, I walked away. I quit my job that day. Making up some excuse about a family emergency, I moved out of my apartment the next week, telling no one where I was going. It's been 3 months since that night. I'm in a new city now with a new job and a new name, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched every time I see a suit-clad businessman. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, I'm back in that stairwell running for my life. I don't know what I stumbled upon that night, a drug operation, corporate espionage, something even worse, but I know one thing for certain: the world is full of shadows, and sometimes the most dangerous things happen right under our noses in the places we least expect. So if you're working late one night and you hear something you shouldn't, my advice is simple: run, and don't look back. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, there's no going back to blissful ignorance. And in this world of secrets and shadows, ignorance might just be the only thing. Keep you safe the first time? I heard the scratching in the walls. I dismissed it as mice. By the time I realized the horrifying truth, it was almost too late. What started as a simple house-sitting job turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name's Emily, and I'd agreed to watch my friend Sarah's house while she was away on a month-long business trip. It seemed like a sweet deal, a break from my cramped apartment, a chance to enjoy a spacious home in a quiet suburb. Little did I know I was walking into a trap. The first few days were uneventful. I settled into a routine, working remotely during the day and enjoying the peace and quiet in the evenings. Sarah's house was beautiful, a two-story Victorian with lots of character, but as the sun set each night, the house seemed to take on a different personality. Shadows grew longer and the silence became oppressive. It was on the fourth night that I first heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the walls. I was curled up on the couch reading a book when the noise caught my attention. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but as I listened, the scratching became more deliberate, more purposeful. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. The sound was clear now, a rhythmic scraping that sent chills down my spine. It seemed to be coming from inside the wall itself, moving slowly upward. Just mice, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. Old houses like this are bound to have mice, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The scratching was too loud, too strong to be caused by tiny mouse paws. Whatever was in the walls, it was much larger. I didn't sleep well that night. Tossing and turning as the scratching continued intermittently by morning, I'd convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, making the night's fears seem silly, but as night fell again, the noises returned. This time they were louder, more insistent, and they weren't just coming from one wall anymore. I could hear scratching from multiple points around the house, as if several things were moving within the walls. I called Sarah, my voice shaking as I described what I was hearing. She sounded concerned but skeptical. "The house is old, Emily," she said. "It makes all sorts of noises, but if you're really worried, call my handyman. His number is on the fridge." I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly reassured. The next morning I called the handyman, a gruff-voiced man named Pete. He agreed to come by that afternoon to check things out. Pete arrived around 3 p.m., toolbox in hand. He was an older man with weathered features and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. I led him through the house, describing the noises I'd been hearing. He listened patiently, then began a thorough inspection of the walls he tapped. He listened. He even cut a small hole in one of the walls to peer inside with a flashlight. After an hour, he turned to me with a frown. "I don't see any signs of pests." He said, "No droppings, no chew marks in these walls." He trailed off, his frown deepening. "What about them?" I pressed. Pete shook his head. "They're solid, no hollow spaces where animals could be moving around. Whatever you're hearing, it ain't coming from inside these walls." A chill ran down my spine, but I heard it. I insisted. "CLE, clear as day, scratching, moving up and down." Pete gave me a long look, then sighed. "Listen, miss, sometimes in old houses like this, the mind can play tricks. You're here alone. It's a strange place. Maybe you're just a bit on edge." I wanted to argue to make him understand that this wasn't in my head, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He thought I was imagining things, or worse, that I was some hysterical woman making a fuss over nothing after Pete left. I felt even more uneasy. If the noises weren't coming from inside the walls, where were they coming from? And more importantly, what was making them? As night fell, the scratching returned with a vengeance. It was louder than ever, and now I could hear something else mixed in with it, a low guttural groaning that made my skin crawl. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Surrounding me, I ran from room to room, pressing my ear against the walls, trying to pinpoint the source of the sounds, but it was useless. The noises seemed to move, as I did always. Just. Out of reach in desperation, I decided to go down to the basement. If there was something in the house, maybe I could find some trace of it. There I grabbed a flashlight and steeled my nerves before descending the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift. The scratching was louder here, reverberating through the concrete floor as I moved deeper into the basement. My foot caught on something. I stumbled, my flashlight clattering to the ground as I bent to retrieve it. My hand brushed against something on the floor, something that felt suspiciously like a handle hard pounding. I directed my flashlight beam at the spot there. Half hidden under an old rug was a trap door. It was made of heavy wood with a rusty iron handle, and as I watched horrified, the door moved slightly as if something beneath it was pushing up. I scrambled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The scratching was coming from under the trap door, growing more frantic by the second. Whatever was down there, it knew I was here, and it wanted out. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I could still hear the scratching, the groaning, now accompanied by a rhythmic thumping. Something was trying to get out with shaking hands. I called Sarah again. This time I didn't hold back. I told her everything. The noises, Pete's visit, and now the trap door in the basement. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was different. Cold, resigned. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said quietly. "What?" I gasped. "Sarah, what are you talking about? What's down there?" "I'm sorry, Emily," she continued as if she hadn't heard me. "I hoped it would stay quiet while I was gone. I should have known better." "Sarah, you're scaring me. Please, just tell me what's going on." Another long pause, then, "It's hungry, Emily. It's always hungry." And now that it knows you're there, she trailed off the line, went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, as the horrible realization washed over me. Sarah knew she'd always known, and she'd sent me here knowing. What was in the house? A loud crash from the basement jolted me back to reality. The thumping had grown louder, more insistent. Whatever was down there, it was getting out. I ran for the front door, only to find it wouldn't open. The windows were the same, sealed shut as if they'd been painted over. I was trapped. The noises were getting closer now. I could hear heavy, dragging footsteps on the basement stairs. The groaning had turned into a low, hungry growl as I backed into a corner, my eyes darting around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. A horrible thought struck me. How many other had there been? How many house-sitters had Sarah sent here, feeding whatever lived beneath the house? The basement door burst open in the dim light. I caught a glimpse of something pale and twisted with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness as it lunged towards me, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I knew my fate was sealed. I don't know how I survived that night. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, my body covered in cuts and bruises. The police had many questions, but I had no answers. The house, when they investigated, showed no signs of the horrors I'd experienced. No trap door, no monster. Even Sarah, when questioned, had an alibi for the entire time. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if maybe Pete was right, and my mind had simply conjured up these terrors from the shadows of an old house. But then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a faint scratching in a quiet room. And I know it wasn't just in that house, and it's still out there waiting hungry. So if you're ever asked a house, sit, especially in an old house with a lot of character, now holds only terror for me. But I know one thing for certain: whatever was out there in those woods, it was real. And somewhere deep in the dark forests of the Appalachian Trail, it's still waiting, watching, hunting for now. I'll stick to the safety of the city, but part of me knows that someday, somehow, I'll have to face those woods again, because until I do, until I confront whatever it was that chased me through the rain and darkness, I'll never truly be free of the fear that now shadows my every step. The wilderness may have won this round, but the game, I fear, is far from. Over the moment I heard those inexplicable noises coming from the supposedly empty floor, I knew my mundane night shift was about to take a terrifying turn. Little did I know what I was about to discover would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Mike, and I've been working as a night janitor at Carlisle Associates for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my screenplay during the quiet hours. The building is one of those generic office towers, all glass and steel, with 50 floors of cubicles, conference rooms, and corner offices. On this particular night, I was going about my usual routine. I'd started on the ground floor and was working my way up floor by floor. It was my numbing work. But I'd gotten used to the solitude. The only sounds were the hum of the vacuum cleaner and the occasional ping of the elevator. I was on the 37th floor when I first heard it, a thud followed by what sounded like muffled voices. I froze my hand still on the vacuum's handle. The 37th floor was supposed to be empty. Hell, the whole building was supposed to be empty at this hour. I switched off the vacuum, straining my ears in the sudden silence. There it was again, definitely voices coming from the floor above. My heart started to race. Were we being robbed? Should I call security? I debated with myself for a moment. If it was just some employees working late, I'd feel like an idiot for raising an alarm, but something in my gut told me this wasn't normal. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I left the vacuum where it was and made my way to the stairwell as I climbed the stairs to the 38th floor. The voices grew louder. I could make out at least 2 distinct speakers, though I couldn't understand what they were saying. I reached the door to the 38th floor and hesitated, my hand on the handle. What if they were armed? What if I was walking into something dangerous? But curiosity won out over caution, and I slowly eased the door open. Wincing at every creak, the 38th floor was laid out like all the others, a maze of cubicles surrounding a central area with conference rooms, but unlike the other floors, this one wasn't dark. A faint light spilled out from one of the conference rooms, casting long shadows across the office. I crept forward, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. As I got closer to the lit room, the voices became clearer. Shipment comes in tomorrow night. We need to be ready. What about security? Johnson's been sniffing around. Don't worry about Johnson. He's been taken care of. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just some late-night meeting. Whatever was happening here, it was illegal and potentially dangerous. I inched closer, trying to peer into the room without being seen. Through the gap in the door, I could make out 3 men. They were gathered around a table covered in papers and what looked like blueprints. One of them was pointing at something on the table, speaking in low, urgent tones. The boss wants this to go smoothly. No mistakes this time. Got it. The others nodded, their faces grim. I leaned in, trying to get a better look at what was on the table. That's when disaster struck my foot, caught on a loose piece of carpet, and I stumbled. I managed to catch myself before falling, but my elbow knocked against the wall with a dull thud. The voices in the room instantly went silent. I heard chairs scraping against the floor and footsteps approaching the door. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of there fast. I turned and ran, not caring about stealth anymore. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of the conference room door banging open. I sprinted towards the stairwell, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and those men as possible. I burst through the stairwell door and started down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I could hear footsteps above me getting closer. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. I had just reached the 30th floor when I heard the stairwell door above me slam open there. "He is," a voice shouted. The footsteps grew louder, faster. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my feet barely touching the stairs as I descended 25th floor, 20th, 15th. My pursuers were gaining on me. I could hear their heavy breathing, their shouts getting closer as I reached the 10th floor. A crazy idea struck me. Instead of continuing down, I burst out. Onto the floor, I sprinted through the dark office, weaving between desks and cubicles. I could hear them behind me, cursing as they tried to navigate the unfamiliar space. I made it to the other side of the floor and found what I was looking for, the second stairwell. I yanked the door open and started down again. With any luck, they'd waste precious time searching the 10th floor before realizing I'd switched stairs. My luck held. By the time I heard them enter the second stairwell, I was already at the ground floor. I exploded out of the stairwell and into the lobby, startling the night security guard at his desk. "Call the police." I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. There are men upstairs there. Before I could finish, the stairwell door burst open again. 2 men rushed out, their faces contorted with rage. They skidded to a stop when they saw the security guard who was already on his feet. One hand on his weapon. For a moment, we all stood frozen, a tableau of confusion and fear. Then one of the men smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made my blood run cold. "There seems to be some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. Our friend here, he gestured at me. Had a bit too much to drink at the office party. We were just trying to make sure he got home safely. The security guard looked uncertain, his eyes darting between me and the two men. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him what I'd really seen, but the words died in my throat as I saw the second man slowly reach into his jacket. In that moment, I made a decision. I turned and ran, bursting through the lobby doors and out into the night. I heard shouts behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, until I was sure I'd lost them. I ended up in a 24-hour diner, shaking and covered in sweat as I sat there trying to decide what to do. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "We know who you are. Keep quiet if you want to stay healthy." My blood ran cold. How had they found my number? What else did they know about me? I spent the rest of the night in a haze of paranoia, jumping at every sound, convinced that every passing car was there to get me. When dawn finally broke, I made my way to the police station, but as I stood outside ready to go in and report what I'd seen, doubt crept in. Would they believe me? I had no proof. Just my word against theirs, and if these men were as connected as they seemed would. Going to the police just put me in more danger. In the end, I walked away. I quit my job that day. Making up some excuse about a family emergency, I moved out of my apartment the next week, telling no one where I was going. It's been 3 months since that night. I'm in a new city now with a new job and a new name, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched every time I see a suit-clad businessman. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, I'm back in that stairwell running for my life. I don't know what I stumbled upon that night, a drug operation, corporate espionage, something even worse, but I know one thing for certain: the world is full of shadows, and sometimes the most dangerous things happen right under our noses in the places we least expect. So if you're working late one night and you hear something you shouldn't, my advice is simple: run, and don't look back. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, there's no going back to blissful ignorance. And in this world of secrets and shadows, ignorance might just be the only thing. Keep you safe the first time? I heard the scratching in the walls. I dismissed it as mice. By the time I realized the horrifying truth, it was almost too late. What started as a simple house-sitting job turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name's Emily, and I'd agreed to watch my friend Sarah's house while she was away on a month-long business trip. It seemed like a sweet deal, a break from my cramped apartment, a chance to enjoy a spacious home in a quiet suburb. Little did I know I was walking into a trap. The first few days were uneventful. I settled into a routine, working remotely during the day and enjoying the peace and quiet in the evenings. Sarah's house was beautiful, a 2-story Victorian with lots of character, but as the sun set each night, the house seemed to take on a different personality. Shadows grew longer and the silence became oppressive. It was on the 4th night that I first heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the walls. I was curled up on the couch reading a book when the noise caught my attention. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but as I listened, the scratching became more deliberate, more purposeful. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. The sound was clear now, a rhythmic scraping that sent chills down my spine. It seemed to be coming from inside the wall itself, moving slowly upward. Just mice, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. Old houses like this are bound to have mice, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The scratching was too loud, too strong to be caused by tiny mouse paws. Whatever was in the walls, it was much larger. I didn't sleep well that night. Tossing and turning as the scratching continued intermittently. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, making the night's fears seem silly, but as night fell again, the noises returned. This time they were louder, more insistent, and they weren't just coming from one wall anymore. I could hear scratching from multiple points around the house, as if several things were moving within the walls. I called Sarah, my voice shaking as I described what I was hearing. She sounded concerned but skeptical. "The house is old, Emily," she said. "It makes all sorts of noises, but if you're really worried, call my handyman. His number is on the fridge." I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly reassured. The next morning, I called the handyman, a gruff-voiced man named Pete. He agreed to come by that afternoon to check things out. Pete arrived around 3 p.m., toolbox in hand. He was an older man with weathered features and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. I led him through the house, describing the noises I'd been hearing. He listened patiently, then began a thorough inspection of the walls he tapped. He listened. He even cut a small hole in one of the walls to peer inside with a flashlight. After an hour, he turned to me with a frown. "I don't see any signs of pests." He said no droppings, no chew marks in these walls. He trailed off, his frown deepening. "What about them?" I pressed. Pete shook his head. "They're solid, no hollow spaces where animals could be moving around whatever you're hearing. It ain't coming from inside these walls." A chill ran down my spine, but I heard it. I insisted. CLE, clear as day, scratching, moving up and down. Pete gave me a long look, then sighed. "Listen, miss. Sometimes in old houses like this, the mind can play tricks. You're here alone. It's a strange place. Maybe you're just a bit on edge." I wanted to argue to make him understand that this wasn't in my head, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He thought I was imagining things, or worse, that I was some hysterical woman making a fuss over nothing after Pete left. I felt even more uneasy if the noises weren't coming from inside the walls. Where were they coming from? And more importantly, what was making them? As night fell, the scratching returned with a vengeance. It was louder than ever, and now I could hear something else mixed in with it. A low guttural groaning that made my skin crawl. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Surrounding me, I ran from room to room, pressing my ear against the walls, trying to pinpoint the source of the sounds, but it was useless. The noises seemed to move, as I did always. Just. Out of reach in desperation, I decided to go down to the basement. If there was something in the house, maybe I could find some trace of it. There I grabbed a flashlight and steeled my nerves before descending the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift. The scratching was louder here, reverberating through the concrete floor as I moved deeper into the basement. My foot caught on something. I stumbled, my flashlight clattering to the ground as I bent to retrieve it. My hand brushed against something on the floor, something that felt suspiciously like a handle heart pounding. I directed my flashlight beam at the spot there. Half hidden under an old rug was a trap door. It was made of heavy wood with a rusty iron handle, and as I watched, horrified, the door moved slightly as if something beneath it was pushing up. I scrambled backward. A scream caught in my throat. The scratching was coming from under the trap door, growing more frantic by the second. Whatever was down there, it knew I was here, and it wanted out. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I could still hear the scratching, the groaning, now accompanied by a rhythmic thumping. Something was trying to get out with shaking hands. I called Sarah again. This time I didn't hold back. I told her everything. The noises, Pete's visit, and now the trap door in the basement. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was different. Cold, resigned. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said quietly. "What?" I gasped. "Sarah, what are you talking about? What's down there?" "I'm sorry, Emily," she continued as if she hadn't heard me. "I hoped it would stay quiet while I was gone. I should have known better." "Sarah, you're scaring me. Please, just tell me what's going on." Another long pause. "Then it's hungry, Emily. It's always hungry. And now that it knows you're there," she trailed off the line. Went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, as the horrible realization washed over me. Sarah knew she'd always known, and she'd sent me here knowing. What was in the house? A loud crash from the basement jolted me back to reality. The thumping had grown louder, more insistent. Whatever was down there, it was getting out. I ran for the front door, only to find it wouldn't open. The windows were the same, sealed shut as if they'd been painted over. I was trapped. The noises were getting closer now. I could hear heavy, dragging footsteps on the basement stairs. The groaning had turned into a low, hungry growl as I backed into a corner. my eyes darting around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. A horrible thought struck me. How many other had there been? How many house sitters had Sarah sent here, feeding whatever lived beneath the house? The basement door burst open in the dim light. I caught a glimpse of something pale and twisted with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness as it lunged towards me, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I knew my fate was sealed. I don't know how I survived that night. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, my body covered in cuts and bruises. The police had many questions, but I had no answers. The house, when they investigated, showed no signs of the horrors I'd experienced. No trapdoor, no monster. Even Sarah, when questioned, had an alibi for the entire time. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if maybe Pete was right, and my mind had simply conjured up these terrors from the shadows of an old house. But then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a faint scratching in a quiet room. And I know it wasn't just in that house, and it's still out there waiting hungry. So if you're ever asked to house, sit, especially in an old house with a lot of character. Be careful, listen to the walls. And if you hear scratching, run, and don't look back, because some things once awakened can never be put back to sleep. What was in the house? A loud crash from the basement jolted me back to reality. The thumping had grown louder, more insistent. Whatever was down there, it was getting out. I ran for the front door only to find it wouldn't open. The windows were the same, sealed shut as if they'd been painted over. I was trapped. The noises were getting closer now. I could hear heavy, dragging footsteps on the basement stairs. The groaning had turned into a low, hungry growl as I backed into a corner, my eyes darting around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. A horrible thought struck me. How many other had there been? How many house sitters had Sarah sent here, feeding whatever lived beneath the house? The basement door burst open in the dim light. I caught a glimpse of something pale and twisted with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness as it lunged towards me, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I knew my fate was sealed. I don't know how I survived that night. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, my body covered in cuts and bruises. The police had many questions, but I had no answers. The house, when they investigated, showed no signs of the horrors I'd experienced. No trapdoor, no monster. Even Sarah, when questioned, had an alibi for the entire time. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if maybe Pete was right, and my mind had simply conjured up these terrors from the shadows of an old house. But then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a faint scratching in a quiet room. And I know it wasn't just in that house, and it's still out there waiting hungry. So if you're ever asked to house, sit, especially in an old house with a lot of character. Be careful, listen to the walls. And if you hear scratching, run, and don't look back, because some things once awakened can never be put back to sleep. What was in the house? A loud crash from the basement jolted me back to reality. The thumping had grown louder, more insistent. Whatever was down there, it was getting out. I ran for the front door only to find it wouldn't open. The windows were the same, sealed shut as if they'd been painted over. I was trapped. The noises were getting closer now. I could hear heavy, dragging footsteps on the basement stairs. The groaning had turned into a low, hungry growl as I backed into a corner, my eyes darting around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. A horrible thought struck me. How many other had there been? How many house sitters had Sarah sent here, feeding whatever lived beneath the house? The basement door burst open in the dim light. I caught a glimpse of something pale and twisted with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness as it lunged towards me, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I knew my fate was sealed. I don't know how I survived that night. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, my body covered in cuts and bruises. The police had many questions, but I had no answers. The house, when they investigated, showed no signs of the horrors I'd experienced. No trapdoor, no monster. Even Sarah, when questioned, had an alibi for the entire time. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if maybe Pete was right, and my mind had simply conjured up these terrors from the shadows of an old house. but then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye or hear a faint scratching in a quiet room. And I know it wasn't just in that house, and it's still out there waiting hungry. So if you're ever asked to house, sit, especially in an old house with a lot of character, be careful, listen to the walls. And if you hear scratching, run, and don't look back, because some things once awakened can never be put back to sleep.